Good morning, everybody. Whew. All right, how's everybody doing? Okay. Got a lot going on this morning already. All right, I'll just catch these last couple of stragglers and then I'll get started here. That's a good idea. Breakfast while we lecture. I should have did that. Okay.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
For module 1.6, I believe it's going over lenses and camera operation and such.
Mhm.
The reading included the anatomy of storyboard, right? And pages 221 to 231 for the camera systems manual, talking about focus. And I looked at it, but in the manual it said like chapter 4 focus, whatever. Nothing in the camera systems manual says anything about focus. Like I looked at those specific pages and I looked at like all the other chapters. I'm like, where I didn't know if it was like a typo or
Run that by me again.
Hang on, let me find the actual reading here. So for the reading resources in 1.6, Elkin's camera assistance manual, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 4, focus measurements and following focus, pages 221 to 231. I looked at Elkin's manual, and I don't know if maybe the PDF I have is like the wrong one or what, because I downloaded it straight from the page, so I don't know if.
Let's see. Let me check mine and see if there's maybe a version problem here. Let's see. Whoops. 221 to 231 in my book is, focus measurements and following focus. Starts on 221. And I was having you read that because part of your homework assignment will be providing a follow focus shot among a couple of other shots. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's let's see if we can't. Whoa, you've gone green. Let's see if we can't address that at the end of the talk, since that's for next
Right.
class session. And let's move ahead, or back, I should say,
Yeah.
to today's work, which will be 1.5. Okay. Let me share my screen with you folks now. Okay. So, oh, you're back. Okay. Was that you or my software that your whole screen went green, Robert?
Not sure.
That's odd.
I think that happened to Clayton before as well.
Did it?
Yeah, I think like first day it was Clayton or somebody. We had another one with a green issue, and
Oh,
I had seen it, so maybe it's just Zoom just having a hiccup.
yeah, I think that's probably what it is. My Zoom hiccups a lot. I don't know about you guys, but okay. So we are going to talk about your camera system today. I got a little presentation for you here, a little keynote. And then I got some bits and bobs around here. I was going to do the best I could. This is kind of a much better discussion to have, where I can sort of pass things around the room and let people handle things and play with things. But due to our limitations today, it's going to be kind of a show and tell kind of thing that way. So I apologize for that. It's going to probably, Well, hopefully not sap too much energy away from the discussion. And I welcome your questions and comments throughout, because this today really is going to be a little bit about personal preference as much as anything. Um, so, if you've already got some experience with building cameras or playing around with cameras, and you have some things to add, that I welcome that to the conversation. So if you go to section 1.5 of web courses, you'll find this interesting sort of Franken camera. This is a collage of several different cameras. We got the Panasonic EVO 1, we got the Area Alexa, it looks like. We've got the original Red 1 in there, buried deep in the middle. We have a Canon C, looks like maybe a C100 or a C300. So it's the point is there's lots of different cameras out there. We're going to talk about a few of them, talk about the ones that you guys have available at UCF, and the cameras that will be your access and focus for your time here in the film program. So let me open up with my little outline here and just tell you what we're going to cover today. So I want to cover the basics of the camera. We're going to talk about EVFs. We'll talk about lenses and attaching lenses, batteries, external monitors, and so forth. I don't do a lot with audio because that was not the world that I grew up in. I know, I realize everything is changing now, but I've had a discussion with your audio instructors at UCF, and we all kind of agreed that I would leave the particulars of those things to the audio instructors, and not sort of compete with them or step on their toes in any way. So if it's audio relevant to what's inside the camera, we can talk about that, but external audio and recorders and microphones and all of that, I kind of leave those conversations to your audio instructors so that they can cover that material with you when it's the right time. Okay. So that's my little caveat about audio controls with cameras. Okay, so Don Henley, building the perfect beast, I call this lecture. You may have heard me say it before, but the best camera, I think the best camera to use on a particular film is the one that's accessible to you when it's time to shoot. So there are a lot of different kinds of arrangements out there. So your camera might take on any one of these particular form factors. So we've got the iPhone we've been talking about, action cams like the GoPro. The first generation Z cam also, I think, falls into that category, even though it has interchangeable lenses, which I find particularly advantageous. Action cams might be your mode of operation. DSLR. So the distinguishing factor between DSLR and mirrorless would be like a 60D, for instance, has an optical viewfinder. So when you put the lens on the camera, you're looking through the optical system. You're not looking at a screen. Something like the GH5, GH4, the viewfinder is still here, but inside it's technically an EVF, a really small EVF that you're looking at through a magnifier. So it's not quite the same thing. I remember when I was first starting, I found it a little disconcerting to look at the internals of the GH series cameras, to look inside the viewfinder, because all I was doing was looking at a monitor, which I could have done at any other spot on the set, whether at the director station, the DIT station, or in a lot of cases as a cinematographer, I have my own monitor to look at. I can do that at various places on set. So when I go to the camera, hearkening back to my film days, I prefer to see what the lens is actually seeing. But in that case, what ends up happening is everyone else on set who's relying on seeing the image coming out of the camera, they're forced to look at some representation of the final image through a separate video tap system, which doesn't, optically, you can either have an optical viewing system or you can have an electronic viewing system. All the digital cinema cameras nowadays seem to be electronic imaging systems. So I just had to get used to it over time. If you're a Canon user currently, and you're like a 5D person, for instance, you'll find the adjustment necessary at some point when you move on to other cameras. So the difference is really, we're talking about DSLR, which is single lens reflex, digital single lens reflex specifically, and then mirrorless, meaning that there's no prism inside redirecting the light from the viewfinder to the image plane at the point when the shutter opens. So the two different distinctions, I kind of use them interchangeably, and that's probably a faux pas, but that's just, one of my little idiosyncrasies. Either way, I'm referring to this style of camera when I talk about DSLR or mirrorless. Mirrorless GH5 series, DSLR Canon series, for instance. Okay. And then you might go with ENG style cameras, which I don't have an ENG platform here to show you today, but you've all seen them, like behind the scenes at CNN, or if you watch any of the YouTube news agencies, you'll see people running around with ENG style cameras, and they can range anywhere from a small sort of palm-sized camcorder to the large interchangeable lens versions. We don't focus on those in the film program so much because they don't offer us many of the same features that we are looking for in a cinema camera. They also tend to be a different kind of, they're geared towards different image compressions, or they might be geared towards different recording particulars that we don't share in the cinema studies department. It's not unusual to see ENG style cameras like the Panasonic VariCam, for instance, working on a movie set, because there were crossover models, the Sony F900 and the Panasonic VariCam are two specific ENG cameras that were able to be what we used to call in the old days panavized. So the cameras would be sort of reworked a little bit. The lens mounts would be changed from ENG lens mount, which was a very problematic mount in a whole series of lenses that we don't deal with, to something that we could use in terms of either PL or Canon EF, for instance. The battery systems might be reworked a little bit. External monitoring systems are added to ENG cameras so that they can function a little bit more like a cinema camera in terms of the number of people that are going to be working around the device. An ENG camera is really kind of a one-man band situation. One camera person, one reporter go out into the field, and that camera person is responsible for the entire function of the camera and the audio and everything. And so there's not a lot of external monitoring going on and other things like that. It's one viewfinder and that's it, because there's one operator and that's it. So it really doesn't support the footprint that we talk about for the majority of our cinema classes. So I don't really focus on the ENG build so much, although we do have a couple at UCF. We have several Panasonic HVX200 systems. And I'm thinking that the journalism department, which is in the other wing of the Nicholson building, across from the cinema wing, they have several Sony systems over there that are ENG style. If you're interested in checking them out, you can do so in the television broadcast department. And then, of course, we have the more traditional cinema build. The one that I've got here today is the Ursa Mini 4.6K is behind me. And I'll build that out a little bit for you guys and show you what that sort of develops into as a full working camera. So those are the kind of the form factors that we have available to us, both out in the field and here at UCF. It's a fairly common selection. And I think it's broad enough to give you a little bit of taste of what's going on in a lot of different areas, so you can sort of develop a preference. That's really what this is about, is for you developing a preference that is comfortable for you when you work. And this is something that I have wrestled with periodically over time, is what kind of camera am I comfortable with using? And I find that is sometimes seasonal, and it certainly hinges on the content that I'm shooting. For instance, if you're shooting a documentary, You may not want to use a full cinema built camera to shoot a documentary because it relies on a certain team of people to work the camera, assistants and so forth. And usually the audio is not geared towards onboard operation so much as it is geared towards limited capture on board, and then it routes your audio signal out so that a separate sound team with separate equipment can monitor that system for you. An ENG camera might be more preferential in a documentary situation. You might like going with a DSLR mirrorless system for a documentary situation as well. It all really depends on what you're shooting and then what your preferences are. So I want you to start getting a sense of what those are. And so I should ask the question before I get too far ahead of myself. How many of you guys have your own camera already? What choices have you made? What do you got, Clay?
I have so I started off with a Nikon D7000. It was handed down to me from my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that mainly for like photography, still photography, stuff like that. And then I eventually saved up for the GH5, and I use that all the time.
Uh-huh.
And that's got a 30 to 100 millimeter lens on it.
Uh-huh.
And then I have sort of a work camera, so I do real estate photography on the side as well, with a separate company, and they loaned me a Canon 80D. I think
80.
It's like 12 80D. Yep.
Okay. So that would be like 2 generations newer than the 60. The 60 is what we got at UCF. So this is pretty similar. It'll function the same, except you got a newer processor in the 80.
Right. Yes, sir. And I've got a wide angle on that one. I think it's a 12 to 30 millimeter. So
Mm-hmm.
that's able to get like, the whole wide spectrum in there.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's it's really great that you mentioned that you're doing the real estate photography. I did that when I was really, really young. That was one of the first things I did. And I shot transparency. So in other words, slide film. And then it was transferred to video to create like I think they called it Sunday Showcase of Homes or something. And so they'd take the transparencies and they would just crossfade one into the other and talk about, what's going on and what the homes were and things of that nature. And that's a really great situation for you to just sort of develop habits of, just how to work and how to conduct yourself professionally, how to get an assignment. I don't know about you, but I used to get assignments and I covered several different cities in New York. So they would give me a list of places to go and I would just spend, a weekend or 3 or 4 days and go around to all of those different locations and just photograph all those locations. And then I'd come back for a day or two of post-production where I would sort through all the selects and edit out all the bad stuff or the things that we didn't need. And then all of that would get sent to transfer and then edited into the show. And it was pretty much a 5-day process, 6-day process, so that on the 7th day on Sunday, we could air the show. And that was pretty much, I did that week in and week out for a couple of years. That was a really good place to just earn your chops a little bit,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
It's
happy
fun
to hear you doing that.
It's good to be able to just have the hands-on experience like all the time with the cameras and stuff. And you get to meet so many people too, and like you don't know who knows who. Like you could do somebody's house who like is a like cousin to Quentin Tarantino, and they could put a good word in for you, kind of thing. So
Yeah,
I like being able to have that interaction with people too.
What's funny is there's a really talented guy on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel called Make Art Now. Have you seen it?
I don't believe so. No, sir.
Well, he was working as a real estate photographer in Los Angeles. And, obviously his talent and his passions were, far in excess of what he was doing for a paycheck. But what ended up happening is his passion for cinema kind of bled into his work for doing the real estate images. And and sort of, it's kind of a chicken and egg. I'm not sure what happened first for him, but he kind of parlayed that into a YouTube channel talking about what he was doing at work during the week. And then he would put together videos on the weekend and talk about shots he was doing. And, like I remember when he first started experimenting with stabilizers. And so he was using stabilizers in his day job, if you will. And then talking about those and developing a sense for those and what he liked and what he didn't like. And one thing led to another. And I think slowly over time, I think the focus shifted from his real estate work to his YouTube work, because he was more in demand on the internet than he was shooting properties. So it was an interesting start for his career. And now he's pretty well known and doing pretty well on YouTube with his own channel at this point. So it was a good springboard for him as well.
There's
I don't know if
definitely
you
some
incorporate
overlap.
some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's definitely some overlap with having that cinematic kind of perspective, that vision, and putting that into perspective when you're doing photography. You're just trying to get those different angles to make the house look that much better, kind of thing.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish we had stabilizers and drones back in the day when I was young and doing that, and cameras that could shoot video that was good enough for broadcast. Because man, what an exciting kickoff to a career I think that would have been. So
Right.
hats off for you for doing that.
We use like a 360 camera on a monopod too. So you put you take a photo in each room and you can like edit it online. You can walk through each room. It's wild.
That's great. That's great. All right. Well, we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but anyway, that's neat. I love hearing about what you guys are doing on the outside. So choosing a camera. So you've obviously you've already made your choices, and those are working for you currently. For anybody who hasn't given this much thought, if you're going to follow into cinematography, you might want to start sort of figuring out what your purposes are going to be for your camera, and then either decide whether or not you want to own it or rent it, or just have it supplied to you by production, or in this case by UCF. It's really going to be kind of up to you how you want to play that. But remember, the best one that you could get is the one that is available to you when it's time for you to shoot your project. So that's really the biggest concern. Everything else, spec wise and so forth, the cameras are pretty comparable nowadays. In the beginning of this thing, when digital first started taking over, there was a lot of variation, and there might have been significant reasons to go one direction or another, say Canon versus Sony, for instance, or Arri versus Red or Blackmagic or whatever. But the cameras are all kind of possessing the same basic set of primary capabilities at this point. So it's starting to level the playing field a little bit. But what I want to stress to you is to be realistic about your choices as well. So ideally, you want the best camera you can get your hands on, but it should be tailored to what you're doing. So for instance, if Clay's doing real estate properties, do you want to bring an Arri Alexa to that job? I don't think so. I mean, I think it would be overkill for the workflow. It would also be overkill for the deliverables, because the deliverables don't need to have nearly the kind of dynamic range and resolution quality that he needs for a real estate program that's going to be broadcast on cable TV, for instance. So you want to tailor your camera to what you're doing, and then be realistic about your expectations. Sometimes you're going to get stuck with a piece of gear that is functional and adequate, but not ideal. And in that case, it's kind of the opposite of the spectrum. You have to bring all of your skills and understanding about the equipment and the technology to bear on that device that's now kind of just good enough to get the job done, but it's not special and it's nothing to write home about. You'll be in that situation as well. So when it comes to that, that's where it's good to have a fairly solid understanding of the tradecraft of working with cameras, so that you can just sort of be confident that whatever you get stuck with, for better or worse, you're going to be able to deal with it properly and effectively. just to reiterate the operational portal at UCF, that's the film department's website, basically. And if you want to know what kind of gear they have available, if I haven't covered it already, go to their equipment tab on their homepage, and you'll get all of the information about what they currently have in inventory. Some gear is available to certain classes and not other classes, because they're trying to control a limited amount of resources with a fairly large student population at this point. So for instance, we have primarily these cameras available to you guys for cinematography one. It's the FZ1000 with the built-in lens. So is it the GH5? No, not exactly. Will it give you all the results you need for your assignments in this class and to do a little puttering around? Absolutely. So if you go to their tab and look, it'll tell you what's available, which classes are capable of checking out what kind of gear, and
What
then you
was
just enter
the
what's here.
what was the model of that one?
The one I just had in my hand,
Yeah.
the FZ1000. So you'll see that in your, actually, I think I give you the instructions and stuff in this section for that particular camera. Check the downloadable PDFs and see if it's there for you. It should be. But yeah, anything you want to know about what UCF is carrying right now, go to their portal and the equipment tab, and you'll get all that information at your fingertips. So the flagship at UCF is the Ursa Mini 4.6K. And so way back in the beginning, when UCF was starting to refurbish the film program, and they were trying to decide what camera direction to go in, there were a lot of conversations, and obviously there was a lot of hype and a lot of curiosity about red cameras 5 or 6 years ago. I think six years ago, maybe 7 actually at this point. And obviously we had to make some pragmatic choices, so the red systems at that time were very pricey, and they didn't have an economical option. Your buy-in with all the required parts and accessories was going to run in excess of about 40 grand per system. And that just wasn't cost effective for UCF at the time, given all the other things that we wanted to do. So we looked around at a lot of things, and it was my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people in that moment in time that, and I still think it was a good choice. The Ursa Mini was offering the best economic advantages per capita with, when you compared features and specs of the Blackmagic design cinema cameras to other cameras on the market. It was very competitive, and yet constantly priced below the competition as far as, the economics and affordability, because it's not just a camera, and you'll see in a few minutes, it's, or what Red likes to call the brain, it's more than just that body part. It's handles and rod beds and shoulder pads and monitors and EVFs and map boxes and accessories and things. And by the time you build that whole business together into a functional studio build, you're talking about many times in some cases the cost of your initial investment. So we picked up 8 systems by Blackmagic, the Ursa Minis, and they have most recently been not supplanted, but joined by a handful of the Pocket 6K cameras as well. So we have some pretty good high-end Blackmagic still in-house. And I think they're great cameras, and they generate some pretty great images that are very workable and very high quality. So I hope you guys will be happy with these systems. There's 8 of those. Like I said, if you take cinematography 2, this fall I have a class of cinematography 2 already booked. Each year we have a contingent. If you take that class, the Ursa Mini 2s are pretty much what we use all the time. So that'll be exciting, I think. We've also got the Canon systems. So I think I mentioned this to you guys last week. The 5Ds and the 60Ds are available in-house. I think they got a half a dozen 60Ds, maybe I got 8 here. I think it's down to 6 at this point. They've also got the consumer version. If you can think of the 60D or the 7D, which is basically the same camera, if you can think of those as the professional version, then the Rebel series would be the consumer version of the same processor and basically the same chip, with a little bit different. The notable differences between these cameras tends to be the photographic specifications, which don't apply to us as much. For instance, the intricacy of the auto-focusing system, for instance, might be a bargaining chip if you were talking about the differences between a 60D and a Rebel T2i, for instance. It might be the focusing system, which we don't really rely on in the cinematic workflows, so it becomes a non-issue. But economically speaking, the T2i cameras are a little bit cheaper than the 60s, 70s, and 80Ds, or the 7Ds for that matter. So we stocked up on those. Like I said,
so you would, oh,
yeah,
sorry. So you would say the Canon Rebel, like the series, or specifically the T2i, would be adequate for cinema style shooting, at least on the low end of just getting the shot and getting it in focus and doing
yeah,
what you need.
the T series are fine. They happened to buy in at the point where the T2i was the current model at
Okay.
UCF, so that's what they have, you know. But yeah, I think they're up to T7i by now, or 6i, I think. So yeah, those cameras have each year they've come out with an upgraded body, which has current specs and everything.
Right.
Um,
And
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 so
they'll fit pretty standard lenses then, pretty
yeah,
interchangeable. Okay.
anything EF will go on the T2i. And then of course, if you have lens adapters, if you wanted to put, for instance, Yashica contacts on the Canon EF flange, you can do that with a little flange adapter. So yeah, they're very functional bodies as far as that goes. But back to the Blackmagic, we have initially we were looking at the Pocket 4K. It has become the Pocket 6K. And then there was an initial purchase several years ago of the original Pocket cinema camera that shoots HD. And those are still available. In fact, I was playing around with mine this weekend just to sort of revisit the camera a little bit and shoot some stuff and compare the footage to some of these other cameras. And I still think it's a very functional camera system. It takes beautiful images. They're only HD, but if your output is YouTube, you don't need anything more than HD for YouTube. You can put 4K up on YouTube. It's, you know, it's a little bit problematic, but you can do it. But really, I think HD is plenty for television broadcast, for YouTube, for, you know, anything where the TV is your exhibition medium. There's nothing wrong with selecting the little pocket camera even now. It has about 12 stops of dynamic range, which makes it a fairly good camera that can render nice images. We'll talk more about dynamic range in a week or so when we're talking about exposure. But suffice it to say that the image files coming out of the little pocket camera, even now, are very robust and have a lot of post-production potential. So you can push and pull the colors and get really, you know, some really nice looks out of the very flat ProRes HQ that it will record in. And it's so it delivers a very nice product in a very small package. In fact, I think I had it out for you guys last week. I've got a couple of them sitting here. I've got mine built inside of cages so that you can add extra stuff to them in terms of accessories. But as far as the body goes, you know, it's still quite small. I mean, this is a Panasonic 20mm lens. This is from the GH series of cameras, but I like it for its size. It's what you might call a pancake lens, And, if for something you want to throw in your knapsack, or, I suppose if you wear cargo pants or something, this would still fit in your pocket with the cage around it. Certainly does without the cage. And just run to, I had mine at the beach yesterday. So, it's fine. And as far as size goes, I mean, the body with the lens on it in the cage is still, not quite as big as the GH5. So it's, as far as that goes, something you want to pull out and get a couple of quick shots of, still makes a lot of sense. And the images are they're very flat when they come out of the camera. So in other words, they're not real vibrant and saturated. That's so that you can see the tonal scale from highlight to shadow more easily, and give you a sense of how you want to sort of tweak that image in post-production. So when you look at the images, right out of the camera, they may look a little flat. I can give you an example of that. I can show you a clip really quick, just it's like 30 seconds that I pulled out yesterday. For instance, here's a shot, just, some palm trees at the beach and a boat bobbing around in the background. But if I show you that frame, this is what I call flat, right? So you see how kind of muted all the tones are, and they're not real vibrant, not real saturated, okay? But you can see here, for instance, this is looking east in Titusville. You can see the clouds are very clearly defined. They're bright, but they're very clearly defined. There's no value within the frame, corner to corner. That's what we call over-modulating or clipping, meaning that there was more intensity, more brightness in the image than the camera was capable of recording. Okay, so you're talking about white fluffy clouds, blue sky, and then palm trees, grass, palm fronds. What are these? All of these little bushes and scrubs here, right? So, but if you take this image into DaVinci Resolve, for instance, and you start pushing and pulling to see what kind of green value you can get in those palm trees and in those palmetto bushes, you'll be very, very surprised to see what kind of information is held inside the data of this image file. Okay, but the presentation right out of the camera is what we refer to as flat. So it doesn't really have a lot of saturated, vibrant appeal, but you can see the full dynamic range of the image. So you got your whites are very nearly absolute whites. You got bright, you got dark, you got mid-tones, right? And then you can, of course, see the detail and everything throughout. So that's what I refer to when I say a flat image file, okay, in case anybody's wondering. Okay, so very, very capable little cameras, a lot of fun to use, easy to stuff, like I said, in a backpack or whatever, and just go. It's more important for you to be comfortable, I think, and compelled to create. Sometimes this stuff can become a little bit of a drudgery when you're talking about taking certain kinds of cameras. Like I've taken the Ursa Mini to the beach, but it's a load out into my car in the morning, the tripod, and then the accessory box, and then the lens box, and then the camera box. And then, next thing I know, I've made 3 or 4 trips to the car just to load up, and I'm breaking a sweat already, and I haven't even left the house, and sometimes you just want to throw it in a bag and go, and that's what I kind of did yesterday. Threw a couple pocket cameras in a knapsack. I had a 14 on one and a 20 on the other. Grabbed a GoPro, threw all that in a knapsack, and just I went to the beach, and hung out. And so sometimes that's the way to go. It's a lot easier. It sort of frees you up to focus more on looking for shots and finding some stuff to look at, as opposed to worrying about whether or not you got all the little bits and bobs you need to make the camera work in order to get the proper kind of image out of it. In fact, talking about cinema cameras, what I forgot yesterday in my haste to just leave the house and go do something fun is I forgot my variable neutral density filter. So we're going to talk about neutral density filters when we talk about exposure. But basically, once you've dialed in the exposure in the camera, if the image is still too bright and you can't solve it with the functionality of the camera itself, you can use a filter that acts kind of like sunglasses for the lens. And as you turn it one way or the other, it will add or subtract what we call neutral density, which is gray value to the image, and essentially darken it up. And I forgot that. And so luckily, one of the reasons why they call this a cinema camera is I went into the camera and there was some functionality that I could manipulate. And it was what we call the camera shutter. And I went in and I changed the shutter from a standard position to something non-traditional in terms of the way the camera functions as a cinema camera, in order to use that as some additional exposure control so I could get my images where they needed to be. So a cinema camera has a lot of control, a lot of times that a consumer camera won't have. A T2i won't give you shutter angle control and stuff like that. You'll be able to change shutter speeds with a T2i. But a lot of times that gives you a different kind of result with some image artifacts we'll talk about that you may or may not find desirable in that situation. So the cinema cameras I recommend for shooting your projects because they'll give you the most amount of control. Okay. We talked about GH5s at UCF. They never got around to buying the GH5s, but they did, as a compromise, pick up 30 of the Lumix FZ1000. So essentially, it's the same camera, but you don't have the interchangeable lens capability of the GH5. So that's pretty much what we carry at UCF. We also have a couple of GoPros, I believe. There's still a couple of those laying around. And then the Sony F3 and the Panasonic HVX 200s. So with all of that said, all of those options that you have through UCF, the other option is you can try renting. If you wanted to try something that UCF doesn't carry, for instance, like a Red Scarlet, or if you wanted to try a Canon C100 or a C300 and shoot your project that way, you can try renting that equipment. There are several places that you can rent gear in Orlando, which I was surprised to find out, but very happy to find out, because it introduces a kind of commerce into your film education and your professional sort of career outside of school, having the ability to go to a business and rent the stuff that you need to work on your projects is really important. Not a lot of cities have a lot of access to this kind of equipment on a local level. You end up having to rent nationally, which is okay from certain vendors, but there's some stuff that you just won't be able to rent that way. But fortunately, we've got 3 or 4 places here in Orlando that are really well stocked and are open to dealing with film students. The professional outfit here in Orlando is called VER, and they rent a lot of ENG stuff, a lot of high-end Red stuff, high-end Canon stuff. So if a production company comes in from out of town and they want to shoot something for, I don't know, Golf Channel, or they're coming in with their own project, their own show from out of town, and they just want some of our backdrops, maybe downtown Orlando or the beaches or something, they might come with gear, or they may come and expect to rent the gear once they get here. And so for those types of clients, VER is out there ready to service them, and they've got, it's a full service rental facility, lighting, grip, equipment, as well as cameras and audio gear and everything. So it's a full-blown professional rental facility that deals with professional production companies. You can certainly go and check out VER, but you probably won't rent from them. They have some fairly high criteria for renting from them. Namely, you have to have $1 million liability production insurance if you're a production company, and have some pretty hefty deposit requirements and things that you're not likely to have as a film student. But if you're a professional working out in the field, those things might not be as much of a challenge for you. Or if you're, a broadcast corporation, certainly those aren't problems or challenges for you. So you got VER, but you've also got places like Lens Depot. And Lens Depot is, I think, so there's a couple. There's Lens Depot and there's Lens Pal, I think they're called. Yeah. I think Lens Pal is the guy that's in Winter Garden, and Lens Depot is the guy that's in Oviedo. So these guys are right down the road from campus. So, and you can see kind of here from my little slide here, the kinds of gear that they are offering. So drones, underwater stuff, stabilizers, lighting, cameras, and monitoring systems. So it's not showing audio here, but they have a fair amount of audio gear. Oh, this is my slide. I can't access their tabs, but if you go to their website, this is what their homepage looks like, and click on any of these tabs, it'll give you their inventories and the accessibility. They rent to UCF students a lot. UCF has a rental insurance rider on their film department insurance policy that will cover or should cover rentals done through Lens Depot to guarantee that, if something breaks while it's out on a project, for instance, that Lens Depot will get the replacement value for that equipment. So you're covered in terms of that from UCF when you deal with folks like Lens Depot. If you don't deal with Lens Depot, or if they don't take your insurance, like I don't know if Lens Pal out in Winter Garden will accept the UCF insurance policy as adequate coverage for their equipment, but they may offer you their own internal insurance for an additional fee. And then you can insure the gear as well, kind of like when you rent a U-Haul, you can purchase the U-Haul insurance when you rent one of their trucks, or you can go with your own insurance. But if you don't have your own insurance, and if they won't accept UCF, then ask them if they have their own in-house insurance policy, and then rent it through them. These guys offer similar kind of inventory. So it's cameras, lenses, lighting equipment, and support, and so forth. So it's the whole 9 yards. I think LensPal also has a YouTube channel, and you can kind of check out what they've got going on. And you might want to check them out one of these days if there's something that you want to try, like a Canon C300, for instance. Nice camera. You might want to give it a shot and see what the difference is, so that if you end up on a job and the production company offers you a C300 to shoot with, you won't be totally lost, because you'll have seen it, maybe rented it from the local vendors and shot with it just to become aware. As cinematographers, that's kind of really important to be aware of the systems that are out there and how they function, basically, so that if you are paired with that equipment on a job, there won't be any learning curve that you're going to have to suffer through in real time while you're trying to get the work done. So checking out what the rental houses have to offer and maybe renting from them to shoot outside work or some of your film projects might not be a bad idea, in terms of nurturing your professional career outside of school. Okay. So don't rely on specs. And this is something that you'll hear a lot of professionals say. Camera specs matter, but even the best camera won't be able to deliver perfect output if it falls in the hands of somebody who doesn't know how to use it. Okay. Which is part and parcel with what I just said about going to the rental houses and checking out what they have, especially when it's different from what UCF has to offer. What matters more is the operator, right? So your skill level, your level of awareness, your level of experience with all of this kind of gear, and let that be the force behind your creative, your concept and your end product. Okay. if you have limited resources or access to, or if you have access to the camera of your choice, remember that you can still work with virtually any cinema camera for most of your needs by finding a compromise between the content you're trying to produce and the capability of the equipment. Okay. So you wouldn't want to take a GoPro into a situation where you knew you had to do a lot of critical focus work and you were going to do a lot of what we call focus throwing, shifting the zone of focus in the frame while the shot is rolling, because you don't have that kind of control with a GoPro. Okay. Or you might not want to do that with a T2i with a really tiny nifty 50 lens on there that's really fiddly and hard to manipulate if you're a focus assistant, and you might want to go with a larger cinema camera for the reasons of accessibility. For instance, here's a little Olympus 50 millimeter lens. It's for a still camera, right? So it goes on the Olympus. Here's one on the Olympus OM1, for instance. Okay, it's, it has a certain purpose. Well, I could mount this to the Ursa Mini if I wanted to. It'd be a little silly, but I could do it if, for instance, if there was something about the way this lens rendered that I liked a lot, and I wanted that rendering characteristic to be present in the images, I could mount this to the Ursa Mini if I wanted to. There's a way around everything. Okay, but you can see how, as a lens is concerned, I mean, if I'm going to start putting matte boxes and other things on the camera, the lens becomes the smallest, most fiddly aspect of that build, and that could be a problem. I might want to go with, for instance, a Rokinon cinema lens at that point, which you guys have at school, which is, a far different device in terms of its functionality and how you can control it. For instance, it's got a much larger focus ring. It has a larger, longer focus rotation for getting those dramatic shifts in focus in the frame that I'm talking about, called focus throwing. Okay, it has gears on the lens so that you can attach apparatus that will help the focus puller easily manipulate this lens, either directly or remotely. Okay. So the cinema lens and the photographic lens, they'll both take a really beautiful image. They're both designed to capture beautiful images, but there's definitely a form factor difference, right? And there's definitely a reason why one over the other would be ideally suited for something you're doing. And then you make the choice accordingly, right? So that's what I mean, when I say qualify the work you're doing so that you pick the right equipment, and you don't get caught in a situation where you got a piece of gear that's clumsy or inconvenient, given the type of responsibility or schedule that you have, and it ends up costing you time and excess energy dealing with a piece of gear that's not well qualified for what you're doing. So, anybody have any thoughts or feelings on that? It's kind of a hard conversation to have on Zoom, because usually I have all this stuff sort of built and I can just walk over and point to stuff and you can see the relationships. So it's a little bit harder to visualize on Zoom, but hopefully I'm still making my points.
So, would you say that something like the Canon Rebel T series, whatever, um, can be functional as long as you use the correct lens? So like you were saying, with maybe the default lens it comes with might be too small, or it might be hard to do the focus as a first AC. So you might invest and get like a bigger lens that's like better. It's got more control over it. So as long as but the body would still be sufficient.
Yeah. Or let's say you let's say you have a Rebel already, and maybe you got the kit lens for it, the 18-55, which is it's a very sharp lens, but it's a very dreadful little lens to deal with if you're trying to use it in a cinematic workflow with a crew and people that are trying to do things, so you might just, go to, say, the folks down at the equipment room down at UCF and ask them what they got in terms of cinema lenses, or maybe you want to build it out a little bit and you want to use a follow focus system and you want to use some nice cut glass filters, so you want a matte box system and stuff. And then you can start building the camera out, which is kind of the next phase of my conversation. So you can take what is the, you know, the nucleus or the essence of what you have personally, and then build out and around it to accommodate the workflow. At the end of the day, it's about the capture device that's inside, which is a lot of times driving your choice of camera, for instance. So the GH5, the image processor, and the Micro Four Thirds mount and sensor. Okay, this camera has very specific utility for me and a lot of people that use these cameras. For instance, if I want to put that Olympus 50mm lens on a cinema camera and shoot with it, it goes really well on a GH5. Makes a lot of sense because the GH5 is very similar to the original platform that the Olympus lenses were designed to work with, the OM series of cameras. So it's very similar. Makes a lot of sense. But on the other hand, would I take that same 50 and put it on the Ursa Mini, which I got back here? Probably not, because, you know, that's the implication. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? When the camera is going to become the the problem because the lens is too small, you know, then you've got to make some decisions, some choices, right? So I love this little graphic because it's like an example of the worst case scenario. It's like, what can we do to your Canon? I think that's a Canon, well, that might be a 60 or 70D in the middle there. What can we do to your camera to build it out and make it do everything that a fully built, say, Ursa Mini or an Alexa would do? Well, you can add an external monitor so that you don't have to deal with this little tiny viewfinder, which when you put it in, this is called a 6-inch C cage. When you put the camera in a C cage, it's no longer feasible for you to use the little tiny EVF. And maybe the flip out screen is useful to you and maybe not. Maybe it's not in the right position. So you might want an additional external monitor to give you a better look at the frame when you're trying to operate and use that camera, that device. So I've got a C cage around here somewhere. Yeah. So this is a 6-inch C cage. Okay. So at the center of this is a little quick release plate. Okay. And so you're going to attach the camera to that. If you're using the GH5, you can fit the GH5 in here. You can certainly fit the pocket cinema camera in here, for instance, and have it mount in there real easily. It affords you a top handle to carry the whole, whatever the whole build ends up being. It gives you a top handle for support. You have a rod base that'll allow you to attach things like your matte box, so you can use your cut glass filters. It'll also give you, by virtue of the frame itself, it'll give you additional mounting points for things like maybe an audio recorder you could mount here. You can attach things like an additional monitor up here instead of attaching an external monitor to, for instance, the hot shoe of the camera, which is one of the weakest points on the camera. You don't want to take your camera's hot shoe, which is only meant to support a small electronic flash, and start rigging a bunch of stuff out of there, because it'll just rip that apparatus right off the top of the camera. So with a C cage, it gives you much firmer mounting points for some of this external equipment. And then the form factor of the camera ceases to become this unit, and it becomes the larger unit itself, which then might be more applicable to your cranes or your dollies or your tripods or your Steadicam or whatever it is you're doing, and make the transition from each piece of support easier as you go along through a film shoot. For instance, even in the early days when I was shooting at my own production company, when I was shooting with the HVX 200s, it's an ENG camera. It's not terribly big, and doesn't weigh a lot. But we used to do a lot of Steadicam work. We would use dollies and jib systems when we shot on stage, but when I went on location, I would invariably want to leave all that gear at the studio and hire a Steadicam operator with a Steadicam rig so we could do the same kind of moves and things that we were doing on stage, but we could do them quicker and easier on location without having to bring dollies and dolly track and jib systems and all that stuff, and then need bigger and bigger trucks to go on location. So I would hire a Steadicam operator a lot. But when you put this on the Steadicam, okay, and this was in the days before we had a lot of options for stabilizers like we do now. Okay, there was no Jun crane in those days. There was no DJI Ronin in those days. There was no Devin Graham glide cam in those days. The glide cam 2000 was about the only product that had come out at that point, and it was absolutely a nightmare to learn how to use. So if you wanted to get a smooth shot, like a steady move with a camera like this, you were going to have a problem with a Steadicam because this is just way too light. So the systems from Steadicam that were available, say 10 years ago, were designed to hold heavier motion picture cameras. So if the lightest camera we had at that point was, say, 25 pounds, I mean, that's 10 times what this weighs. I think maybe this weighs 2 pounds, right? So I'd end up having to attach extra weight to the Steadicam just so that the operator had the right feel and the right ballast and displacement of the rig when he was trying to functionally do a move, right? Without having the right payload on the Steadicam. The arm didn't work dynamically the way it was supposed to. He didn't have the same sense of fluidity or the same sense of his choreography because he didn't have the right weight attached to the rig. So I used to add extra weights, like dive weights, for instance. I'd go to the dive shop and buy a bunch of extra lead or shot bags and attach those to the Steadicam just to weigh the rig down so that it felt like what they were used to dealing with. Okay, we don't have to do that now. We have a lot more tools and accessories available than we did 10 years ago, 7 years ago. But it's still a consideration. So if you build out your little GH5 with something like this, and then you want to mount it on a Steadicam, there's not going to be a problem because it's going to give you the right kind of weight and displacement that the Steadicam is used to handling.
So Walsh, is this the Steadicam you were talking about? Something like this?
Trying to get
has the weight at the bottom.
That looks like a glide cam type of rig there. So that's a basic mechanical stabilizer. So it's got counterbalance at the bottom. It has an extendable mast so that you can change the center of gravity of the rig. And then you've got a top stage, which has adjustability side to side and front to back so that you can balance what we call the node, which is the center of balance of the camera. And then it has a handle with a gimbal attached to it so that you don't translate any of your arm or body movement into the flow and movement of the device itself. So it's a very basic mechanical stabilizer, okay? That stabilizer was originally developed and invented, I think, back in 1991. And it was designed to work like the Steadicam, which was developed and introduced in 1974 by Garrett Brown. So it's less complex as a machine than a Steadicam, but the principles are essentially the same. Yeah. And if you can get used to working with that tool, you can get very glassy moves out of that tool, very nice looking shots out of that tool. But there's a definite learning curve with a glide cam that you won't have with other kinds of stabilizers.
Absolutely.
Do you know who Devin Graham is? Have you seen any of his Devin Supertramp on YouTube, for instance?
I don't believe so, but I'm going to write that down so I can watch it. Is it Devin Supertramp?
Yeah, Devin Graham is his name. And Devin Supertramp was his handle on YouTube. And he was one of the early adopters and pioneers of the glide cam rig, like the one you've got. And he's got some really interesting footage on YouTube that'll show you what he was able to do with a glide cam. It's pretty amazing what he did with a glide cam. Of course, he's graduated to bigger stabilizers now, and his business has grown, and he's doing more complex stuff. But in the very beginning, he was 5D guy with a 24-70 Canon L lens and a basic stabilizer like the one you've got. And he did some pretty amazing stuff with those very simple tools. So
I'll definitely have to look him up.
the lesson there is this stuff can get as complex as you want to make it, but it doesn't mean that you have to do things that way. You can go right back to a basic, a basic camera and lens and handhold it if that's what you think is appropriate. Now, the caveat there is a lot of folks will default to that mode because it's less work, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best mode for your film, and it might not serve your script as well as if you employ the appropriate tools, okay? And namely, a tripod, okay? I can't tell you how many times I've had to agonize through a student film presentation and look at 20 minutes of handheld work. And there's a time and a place for a handheld camera. All the time is not one of those choices. All the time, it means you're not doing your due diligence. You're not even trying to think about the camera's role as the point of view of the audience. Sometimes that camera has to move. Sometimes it has to be rock solid and not move. Sometimes it has to fly and do things. And sometimes it just needs to move undetectably or subtly in a way that doesn't call attention to itself, but focuses your audience on a performance, which is ultimately the most important thing. All right. So going handheld with your camera all the time is not a choice. It's a cop-out. Okay. Having said that, there are films that have been almost exclusively handheld. The Revenant comes to mind as in terms of recent films that have been shot in a way that seems to reflect handheld a lot. But if you really look closely at The Revenant, there's Steadicam work in The Revenant, there's tripod work, there's crane work, there's drone work. There's a lot of modes, and they all fall under the same sort of tentpole concept. It's just called camera support. Okay, what device are you using to support the camera, and either lock it down or move it in a deliberate way that supports your story? Okay, so if this is your mode for a run and gun documentary about people who take the subway in New York City to work every morning, this might be the best workflow you could come up with because it's small, lightweight, unobtrusive. You can shoot with it in a crowd, doesn't call a lot of attention to itself, and takes a really nice 4K image. But it might not be what you want to shoot a full-blown movie with. Okay, and so there's a time and place for everything. These days, especially on fairly large movies, they might use a combination of both cameras. One camera makes sense for a particular shot, and then when that shot's done and you're moving on to the next shot, you go back to the studio camera from the DSLR, for instance. In fact, I was just looking at an old interview from Rodney Charters yesterday, and Rodney shot almost all of the series 24, and he also shot Dallas. And he's shot a number of things for broadcast television, and he loves the little pocket Blackmagic camera. In fact, he was talking specifically about a scene that they were shooting in a limo for the TV series Dallas, and the studio cameras that they were using on that show were the Arri Alexa Studios, big cinema cameras, a little bit bigger than the Ursa Mini when it's built out. And he's talking about having to shoot a scene inside a limousine. And so he said, you know, by the time we get the actors in the limo and the camera assistant in the limo and the operator in the limo, and then me, I'm the director in this particular episode, and I want to get in the car and direct from the car, not from a chase van with a handheld monitor on a remote. I want to be in the car as well. And I wanted 2 cameras. He said, we just couldn't fit all of that in the limousine. So he said, we sucker cupped one of these to the window on the inside, put a wide lens on it, and shot one piece of coverage with a little camera on a suction cup, and the other piece of coverage on a tighter lens on the full-blown Arri Alexa. He said, and when we took it back into post, the images matched up so well, it was hard or impossible to tell which camera shot which if you didn't know already which lens was on the small camera and which lens was on the big camera. So sometimes we're using combinations of these tools to get the job done, okay? And they are just that, tools, right? So I've always had a little bit of an identity crisis when it came to cameras. It's like my camera is kind of a reflection of me and the choices that I've made, and it produces the images that I want it to produce. And so I have a very close relationship or identification to my cameras as far as tools. But at the end of the day, you have to try to separate yourself from these crutches, if you will, and say, look, maybe the Ursa Mini is my favorite camera, but for this particular shot, it's not going to make sense. Let's say it's a drone shot and I have to mount the camera to a drone. I'm not going to mount the Ursa Mini to a drone. It's, but I could sure as heck put a pocket camera on there or a GH5 on there and get the shot that I need for the 5, 10, 15 seconds it's going to be on screen, and just cut that in with the material from the bigger, nicer camera. And chances are, if the content is compelling enough, and if you've done your homework, the audience will never worry about what camera was shooting what, right? As long as we don't disturb their concentration on the story, right? If they stop thinking about the story and start thinking about, oh, that image doesn't look any good compared to everything else, if you pull them out of that moment, if you what they call suspend their disbelief, that's where the problems start. But if your story is good enough and your angles are compelling and your shots are interesting, and you put, you slip in a gimbal shot here or a drone shot there or a GoPro shot in another place, if it's just intercut with a lot of other stuff and you don't interrupt the audience's focus, you get away with it. And then of course you'll understand the value of having all these different kinds of tools. Okay, so I like to show you these Cook Optics videos. So I got a quick one here. Gavin Finney from the BBC is talking about testing cameras and lenses in pre-production before they start shooting, trying to make decisions about what camera is going to work best for the movie or the TV show, what kinds of lenses do they want to use, and then with what kind of lighting, and then they do tests prior to principal photography to make sure that all of their choices are going to work well under the circumstances they're going to be dealing with. So let's hear what Gavin has to say about testing.
The testing process for me is really important because everything changes constantly. There's a new camera every 6 months. We've almost come to the end of HD now, and we're now moving into 4K, ultra high definition, high dynamic range, high frame rate. So there's always new cameras and new codecs, new lenses, new post-production, and these all have an impact on how the image looks. And so testing is a good way of keeping on top of that and being aware of what's out there, what things look like and how they can help you with solving problems. And so Wolf was a good example. The director, Peter Kosminski, hadn't shot digital before. He'd always shot film. So I said, let's look at all the available cameras. Let's test everything. Let's not say we're going to use this, this, this. Let's just put them all on a flat kind of playing field and see how they react to the things we're going to throw at them, like candlelight and daylight. See whether this is possible to light by candlelight. And that was the start. So we went to rental house and lined up all the cameras and got candles and got my camera assistants and got a bowl of fruit and got them to move around and turned all the lights out and just saw what would happen. And we did the same with daylight. Quite crudely, then took the whole lot to the post-production house, put it through a very straightforward system and told the house, get the best image you can out of each camera. And then we just projected it all and looked at it. And we didn't look at it with any kind of measuring stick or any technical resolution chart, or we just said what looks like Wolf Hall, what gives us the look we're after. And by that, we were able to sort of narrow down the cameras that had technical problems, the cameras that didn't have technical problems, the cameras that started to have an interesting look. I mean, lenses, because you can't separate the two, they're a pack. So in fact, I mean, there's a really good series of books. I don't know if they're still available, by a great landscape photographer called Ansel Adams, who shot amazing pictures of Yosemite National Park and parts of America using a plate camera, a big black and white plate camera, and they're stunning, stunning photographs. And he published a series of books called, I think it's called The Camera, the Negative, the Print, because you can't separate those three. The image is a result of all those three. The image then is a result of the negative, the camera and lens system, and the print, because the print involves another lens, the projector, and the paper and the chemicals. And it's only when you get to the end that you've got your image. And so it's the same. You've got the camera body, you've got the lens in front of it, you've got the post workflow, the codecs that are applied, you've got the grade, and you've got how it's seen. And it's only when you get to the end that you've got your finished image. And so it's actually, all of those are a unit. They become the image taking process. And so when you're testing, you're assembling all of those elements, and they all work differently. So you pick things, you don't pick a body and a lens, you actually almost have to pick things simultaneously. So, okay, how do these lenses work with these bodies? And what we found was a Cooke S4 would look different on a Red Dragon than it would on an Alexa. A Master Prime would look different on a C300 than it would on a Sony. And so you start to, we tested all the bodies, and then we tested all the lenses on all the bodies, so we could see what combination looked right. So and then you take it to the post house and you test them, you're testing their process. And it's only when you get to the end of that chain that you've got your final image. And then you say, okay, that's our image taking system, but it involves the whole link. You want to see what's the dynamic range of the camera. You want to see from the brightest, when will it clip highlights, when will it lose detail in shadows. You want to see how faithful the colors are reproduced. Are different colors pushed more than other colors? You want to see how malleable the image is. How much can you push it in post-production before it starts to fall apart? And also there are things, does it look too sharp? Does it look electronic? Does it look modern? Or does it look organic? Or does it look grainy? Does it look soft? I ask you're looking for subjective adjectives rather than, what's the MTF curve? What's the Bayer response? What's the resolution? I'm not interested.
So that last remark, I think, was the most salient point of the whole video, right? Which is, the last thing he's worried about is the internal specs of the camera itself. He's more worried about whether he's got the right tool for the right job, if he's chosen the right lenses to go with the sensor that he's shooting. So here's an important distinction, right? When we talk about picking the right camera, okay, we're talking about picking the capture device. So the camera, you can think of the camera in a couple of different ways. You can think of it in its totality, where it has buttons and controls, and it has a way of managing the image creation. And then you can think of it as merely the capture device. Okay. And the capture device is much more akin to choosing a film stock in the days of film, right? So the camera and the image sensor all together in its totality is the camera. But a lot of times what we're really saying is, I'm picking this sensor because of the way it renders, and I'm using that as my preference to the rest of what this device does in its totality. Okay, so in this, you've got the Super 16 image sensor. In the GH5, you've got the Micro Four Thirds sensor, which has its own set of challenges, but its own set of advantages. For instance, Micro Four Thirds lens mount and sensor, you can accommodate virtually any, and I haven't run into one yet, any vintage lens that you can think of can be adapted to this camera. Okay. And if you don't believe me, you can start with the article that I wrote for Video Maker last year about, and I took 10 vintage lenses that were like the legendary glass from days of old, from photographers who used to rave about the quality of those particular lenses. I acquired all of them, and then I tested all of them all on the GH5, and I talk about the results, what the lenses looked like, how they rendered, show you pictures of them, how I had to adapt them to the mirrorless camera and shoot video with them as opposed to photographs. The Micro Four Thirds has that ability. That's something that you can't do on the Ursa Mini, for instance, and might not want to do. Is, you know, put a vintage lens on there that's so tiny and so fiddly that it just interrupts the workflow of that camera. The Canon series cameras are using a chip that's a little bit bigger than the Micro Four Thirds, the APS-C. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger still, closer, but not quite, but closer to the size of the sensor that's in the Ursa Mini. So the Ursa Mini, I think, has the Super 35, and if I just take it off of this platter here for a minute and just show you the sensor inside. So the Ursa Mini's got a Super 35 sensor, really big inside there. Okay, the wide angle on my laptop is distorting the size of the flange relative to the size of the sensor, but this sensor is easily twice as big as the Micro Four Thirds sensor in the GH5. Okay, so this sensor is a choice. Okay, what does the sensor do in terms of its rendering quality? Its response to a tonal range. So this camera, of all of the cameras I've been waving in front of the laptop for you, has the most tonal range of all of them. It has 15 stops of dynamic range. That's the reason why you're picking this sensor. And then you have to deal with this as a consequence of choosing that sensor. You have to deal with this over this, right? But, you know, there's a reason. So just make sure the reason matches the tool. And the reason would be the script, right? If the script is calling for it, or if this becomes the most functional tool to do everything that you need to do for that movie, then this becomes your tool, right? And then you just learn to work with this and, you know, do what you have to do to build this out to perform the way it needs to perform. Okay. I'm going to build it out for you in a second and show you how sort of big and ridiculous it can get. But for now, I just want you to think about that. Okay. So here are some possible accessories. This is stuff we're going to start talking about. These are things that you're probably going to need, and you're going to want to have access to them. Okay. A sturdy tripod. That's where the conversation needs to start. So I've got mine kind of in here amongst a bunch of equipment cases and stuff. And I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I can squirt a little. So I have a Manfrotto 516. They actually don't make these anymore. It's been replaced with the let's see, there's a 504 basic head. I think it's a 525 head maybe. This is a 25-pound payload tripod head. Okay, the stuff that you guys have some Sackler stuff at UCF, which is the 16 to 20 pound range, I think. This head is designed to take a little bit beefier camera. And that's because when I build out my Ursa Mini, for instance, it weighs right in at about 23.5 pounds. So what you don't want to do is overrate the support that you've chosen for your camera. So if your camera is going to weigh more than the tripod is prescribed to handle, you should move up to the next size piece of support. Okay. But I chose the heaviest, beefiest heads that I could get my hands on when I started my own company, just to make sure that I never had a tripod that was underrated for the camera that I was going to use, and I could actually grow into it a little bit. So the cameras that I would put on here routinely back in the day, like the little HVX 200s that we had, fully built, those only weighed about maybe 8 or 10 pounds. But when I moved up to the HPX 500, which was the full size ENG style camera from Panasonic, the Vericam family, when that camera was fully built out, it was a 25-pound camera. So I needed to make sure I had a head that I could grow into. When I grew into a bigger camera, I didn't have to go out and buy another really expensive tripod. So, you know, this tripod, I have 3 of these that I purchased. The heads were $600 a piece, and the legs were another $350 to $399, depending on where I bought them. So, you know, I had $1,000 tripod and times 3, because I always shot with 2 cameras, and then the third one I would break up and disperse amongst cranes and jibs, or camera cars or dolly, whatever, so that I never had to move the same piece of gear all over the set all day long. I could give a piece to my assistant and say, go rig that device that we're going to deal with next while I'm shooting over here, okay, with 2 cameras. And I would move equipment that way. Okay. So it made a lot of sense for me to have 3 tripods instead of just 1. But the idea was, it was a tripod that was fully rated for whatever piece of gear I wanted to put on it. And it had a nice fluid head. You can see as I'm panning this head around, it has a nice sort of smooth, glassy feel to it. And when I mount the camera on there and I'm recording, if I want to pan and follow the subject moving through the set, the fluid head is going to help me keep the camera from, you know, having a jittery pan. Okay. And of course the fluid head is critical. If you don't have that, you know, the tripod is performing a minimal service to you without the fluid head if you're shooting video. Okay. But having the ability to have a nice smooth pan is really, really important, because you're going to do that more often than not, more than you think. Just, you know, maybe in a conversation, maybe a character sitting in a chair talking to somebody right over your shoulder, off camera here, but if they're shifting in their seat. You see, I shift to my seat a lot when I'm talking to you guys, you know, in the course of a lecture. You might want to pan to accommodate that amount of movement within the frame when the actor's moving around, to keep them in a specific spot in the frame. So you're going to be actively panning the camera when stuff like that is happening. You want to have a head that will allow you to do that and have the adjustments be so clean and subtle that the audience is not going to their attention won't be drawn to what you're doing. They're going to focus on what the actor is doing, right? That's really, really important. Blah, 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 blah. We'll talk a little bit about handheld shots. Like I said, you know, there's a right time and a right place for the handheld shot. And I'll show you what I do when I need to do a handheld shot. We'll talk about the lenses, external recorders, and then I'll probably just breeze over microphone and sound recorder. I have some videos that you can watch if you want get a little more info on those topics, but I'm not going to focus on it here. And then I talked to you a little bit about slates already, but I did bring my tablet today. So I wanted to point out something I mentioned to you guys the other day. How many people here use iPads? Anybody? Or is that kind of passe already?
I still use one.
So I use one for a variety of reasons. It's not my go-to device, but you know, there's a time and a place for it. And one of those things that I use it for is for my time code slate. So I mentioned to you the dumb slate the other day and showed you a couple of versions of the, you know, the standard manual slate, or the dumb slate, we call it. And the DigiSlate, see if I can get this thing to work. Well, that's interesting. Back to square one. Huh. I might have to reboot it. I have a time code slate in my tablet. And what you do is you just swipe the screen and the little digital sticks will smack. And where it says DigiSlate right here, will have a free running time code. And when you smack the sticks, the time code will stop and display the time code signature, which is what the editor will use to locate your clips in a longer, not in his timeline, but in a longer batch of clips coming off of a piece of recording media. So you can go with the dumb slates. You can go with, I think the slate is available for the phones now too. Let me see if I put DigiSlate on my cell phone. I might have. I don't see it. Oh yeah, here it is. So when you open it up, it kind of looks like that on the cell phone. And then you're supposed to change all of these headings to put in your specific information. Let me see if here's the time code, the free run time code, right? And then if you swipe the phone, it gives you the little sticks. Now it's funny because I used to use slates that were this big when I was a camera assistant. If we were doing an insert shot, like if we had to do the shot of a watch face, or, you know, bubbles in a glass of wine, or car keys in a bowl, whatever an insert might be, we would use a small slate like this to get inside of a very, very tight frame on a small image. And so I think that's probably why I ended up putting DigiSlate on my cell phone. I can't imagine using it as a normal workflow, but on the other hand, right tool for the right job. There might be a moment in time when this is the perfect size slate for me. Okay. And then I'm going to use it. So that's DigiSlate. I thought you guys might like that because I know you all are very, closely identified with these devices more than anything else at this point. So there are slates and light meters and all kinds of stuff, tools you can load into your cell phone.
There's also a setting. I downloaded the app and I'm playing with it now. There's a setting where you can set it to like timer, so you can swipe it and it counts down to like 3, 2, 1, and then it slaps. That's pretty cool. I'm sorry, I was having fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, you can geek out all you want. It's I think it's pretty neat because when I was a camera assistant, if you wanted a digital time code slate, the only option out there was about a $1,200 slate. So I used to pay, I think I would get a new slate on every movie or TV show that I did. So I'd go to Panavision, for instance, and I'd buy a slate like this would cost me about $50. Okay. And sometimes we would have them engraved with the show name, or sometimes I'd just use, press tape or whatever to put the name of the show on there. But I used to pay about $50 a piece for these until I started making them myself. And then of course, all it was cost of manufacturing. But so a $1,200 time code slate, well, I just wasn't going to do that. Okay. I would supply the dumb slate to production as part of my kit rental, or have them buy it. And then the time code slate, in those days would be provided by the audio department. So the sound mixer would generally be the person who would have the time code slate, because they were generating the time code sync signal in the recorder anyway. So they would do something called jamming the slate. So they would take time code out of the audio recorder, translate it to the slate, and then you could take the slate on set, and the time code that was free running on the time code slate would be the same time code running in sync with the audio recorder. And then the camera would shoot it and record that image of the time code running and ostensibly put the time code on the film. And then when you smack the sticks, that gave you your manual sync point for the editor. And he also had, the minute the sticks close, the time code readout of that specific point, so that they could line up and sync the dailies for us, line up the audio with the picture, and then start cutting everything together and have the lip flap work the way it was supposed to. All of these mechanical processes that we had to deal with have been simplified, and in some cases removed from the process in the digital age. But it's important to know where all of these procedures hail from. Know why you're doing now what you do now based on the way it used to be done, because everything that we've done in the digital generation has been sort of a mirror of the film generation, and then potential upgrades as we move through time further and further away from the nexus when, when film and digital sort of met and then diverged or converged, I guess, because we still have film available to us. 2009-ish. Okay, so we're about 11 years out from that historic moment in time. And it's nice to know why we do something a certain way now. Well, it's based on something that we used to do, which probably was more complex. All right, so let me show you this quick. This is fairly quick. This is Kelby training from B&H Photo in New York. And I'll show you videos like this because it's nice to know about these vendors. I don't know how many of you know about B&H Photo, but they're an excellent supplier of our industry and the photographic industry. They're a wholesaler out of New York City. They have an online store. And they also produce these training videos. So they did one on tripods, the Manfrotto that they carry at the store level. And it's just a quick introduction to fluid head tripods. So let me show you that really quick.
Hello everyone, Mia here. If you're used to the quality photos a DSLR takes and you want the video you shoot with it to match, then you should start from the ground up. The right tripod and tripod head can make all the difference when it comes to shooting shake-free video. When shooting video, it's really important to have the right base to get smooth, level shots. You'll need a fluid head and a sturdy tripod to get video that looks clean and professional. So what is a fluid head? And how is it different from the ball, pan, or gimbal head you use for photography? As opposed to the swinging motion of the gimbal head or the more free-form motion of a ball head, tripod heads for video applications tilt forward and back and pan. That is, they rotate along the horizon left to right. Now, some heads advertised as fluid heads don't actually have fluid inside. Of this particular group, only the Manfrotto has fluid cartridges. But the important factor to consider is the friction-free movement of the head. This reduces any jerkiness from the camera operator. And among this group, I found that they all performed smoothly. A good fluid head will have a series of locks. One lock should hold the tripod plate in place. One will unlock the tilting feature, and one will unlock the pan. You'll find these locks on even the most affordable video heads and tripods. Take this Magnus, for example. It has simple controls that work well for your basic maneuvers. In the field, I liked how quickly I could set it up, unlock it, and begin shooting. If you want more control over the speed at which you can tilt and pan, you'll want to look at a fluid head with tension controls. I'll show you what I mean on this Manfrotto head. This model is the 502 HD. One tension wheel controls the drag on the tilt, and the other controls the drag on the pan. A drag refers to how fast or slow you want to turn the head. Think of what it feels like to run through water, that resistance you feel against your body. Well, that's how this works. You can control the amount of resistance against your movement to get nice, steady pans and tilts. In fact, video shake is most noticeable when you're zoomed in and following a subject like a sailboat or wildlife. This is where the fluid head and tripod combo really shine. No matter how tight your shot is, you should capture video that looks effortless and friction-free. Moving up a bit in quality to a fluid head like you'll find on this Soxhler tripod, you can expect a counterbalance control in addition to the locks and tension controls. Counterbalance is about more than keeping your camera and tripod from toppling over. If the right counterbalance is maintained, the camera remains stationary at any tilt angle, so you're able to maintain precise control without the need to hold the camera by hand. The other two heads have a fixed non-adjustable counterbalance that will work with a wide range of cameras, but this Soxhler head gives you control over the spring-loaded counterbalance. So no matter what type of camera and lens combo or camcorder you put on top, you can find the perfect counterweight and you never have to worry about your camera ending up in the dirt. Counterbalance especially comes in handy if you're working with a larger camcorder or a rig to hold your DSLR and accessories. Now, these tripods can support up to 8.8 pounds. Now, before we get into the tripods, it's important to understand the different ways that the video heads connect to the legs. This Manfrotto head features a standard 3/8-inch socket that connects to the tripod's corresponding screw in the same way that photo heads do. Other heads, such as this Soxhler Ace Fluid head, connects to a corresponding bowl on the video tripod. This comes in various sizes, 65 millimeters, 75 millimeters, even 100 millimeters. So make sure your tripod and your head can fit together properly. A good video head will have a bubble level to help you line your camera up with the horizon. Unlike photography, video is almost never shot on an angle. The half ball leveler heads like this Ace and Magnus feature a grip underneath the head. You can use it to rotate that head and find a level shot. From there, you can set your counterbalance correctly. Now, with heads that attach through a screw like the Manfrotto, you'll need to adjust the tripod legs to level your camera. Let's move on now to the tripod itself. Don't make the heavier is better mistake. There are plenty of good tripods out there for DSLRs and consumer camcorders that are lightweight and easy to tote. Now, if you plan to use the tripod in inclement weather situations or on unsteady surfaces, then you might want to look at some heavier alternatives. But for your average shoots, the Magnus VT4000 will provide a strong, sturdy base, and it weighs just under 8 pounds. The Manfrotto 055X we're featuring weighs 8.5 pounds, and the Soxhler Ace tripod and head comes in just under 10 pounds. All of these tripods are made with aluminum and should all feel solid under the camera. Another part of the tripod that could make a big difference when shooting in the field is the spreader. This is a 3-spoke mechanism that extends and collapses the legs. Some tripods have ground spreaders, which are great for low-angle shooting and feel very steady. The downside is they can only be used on flat, even surfaces. But most have middle spreaders, like you'll find here on the Magnus and the Soxhler. These allow you to adjust the bottom of the legs to accommodate uneven surfaces. The higher-end Soxhler offers an adjustable spreader, which is helpful if you're shooting someplace where space is limited. You can pull the tripod legs in as close as possible and still get a stable level shot. The Manfrotto 055X doesn't have a spreader. Its leg angle is adjustable with these metal levers. This is an advantage for low-angle shooting. This tripod has a low-angle adapter that allows you to get nearly to the ground for extremely low shots. A middle spreader prevents you from getting an angle this low. Let's move down the tripod to the feet. If you're only shooting in the studio, then basic rubber feet will be fine. But if you plan to shoot outdoors, look for a tripod with rubber feet that retract to expose spikes. Spikes can come in handy on dirt to root your tripod in place. There are a few extras that I would recommend to make your life a little easier. If you're working outdoors, make sure your tripod has a hook for a weighted bag. That way, if the wind kicks up, you can keep your sticks firmly planted. Check to see if the tripod you like comes with a carrying case. This lined Sockler bag is a great example of one that's easy to tote, protects your equipment, and looks professional. If there's not a bag included, does it have easy to carry grips on the legs so you don't have trouble with it sliding in your hands, especially if you're shooting in the rain? Now you should feel comfortable picking out a tripod that will accommodate your video needs. I can't say enough about making sure you choose a fluid head and tripod that you're comfortable working with. So if you can get your hands on them before you buy, do it. Then you can get a feel for what you like best. I'm Mia McCormick. Thanks for watching.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.
Okay, so B&H is a good resource. I've bought a lot of gear through B&H over the years because they have, you know, a really broad selection, and they've got photo or video or darkroom or computer, audio, and even in some cases, musical equipment and props and things as well. So B&H was always a really good resource, especially in the days where there wasn't a lot of online marketing the way there is now. So B&H has been around for a really long time, like almost 100 years already. So they're a pretty old and reliable, respected company. So, you know, if they've got a decent video, I don't mind showing it, even though there's a little bit of marketing in there. One of the things that she said about don't worry about the tripod being, you know, heavier is not necessarily better. The only caveat with that is you don't want to put a 25-pound camera on a tripod that weighs 6.5 pounds. Obviously, that's a top-heavy situation. It's not a smart idea because the camera more than likely is going to take a dive. If it doesn't do it under your hand, you're going to turn and talk to somebody, or you're going to go to craft services or go to the bathroom, and somebody's going to bump into that camera and knock it over because your tripod's not sturdy enough. Okay, so a lot of people discount the value of a tripod. They feel like it's a superfluous, extra heavy, bulky thing they got to lug around, and they don't really need it. But the reality is, if you're not on a dolly, then you should be on a tripod for 95% of what you're doing. And then the other 5% is everything else, whether handheld, Steadicam, crane, jib, whatever. So the bulk of your work at one point or another is going to be off the tripod or on a dolly itself. So don't discount the value of that tool. My tripods weigh probably about 15 pounds a piece. And there's no spongy grips for your hands. It's just, you know, hard knocks and deal with it. But, you know, I go with the utility of the device before I go with the little added comforts that just drive the price up, but don't add any capability to the actual tripod. Okay. So, these Manfrotto heads, you guys have the 502s, 502 HDs at school, and you also have the Sackler at school. And then they have some smaller tripods for the Panasonic FZ1000s are made by Liebig. And they're a decent little lightweight travel style tripod with video legs and spreaders. So you've got a variety of different leg support at UCF. One of the things that I'll invite you guys to do is, especially over the summer, if you find yourself going to the campus for any reason or whatever, if you call ahead and ask if you can just check out some of the gear, as long as they're not busy or loading out a big equipment package or something for a senior or a grad student, most of the time they're more than happy to let you, look around at stuff and check out gear or test gear or whatever. You just have to do it, it's all about the timing, right? So you don't want to go in there when they're really busy or doing inventory or something and then want to pull out a bunch of stuff. But they're more than accommodating to you if you want to go check some of this stuff out and just put it in your hands and play with it a little bit. Given the opportunity, or when you have a shooting assignment due, you guys will do too for me, take advantage of it and go and rent some stuff from UCF, check it out of the equipment room and go play with it and start getting your hands on some gear and start, testing stuff and seeing what you like. Okay, so here's the part where we start talking about building your camera out. So supports like cages and rod beds and so forth, they have blossomed into an entire industry. In the humble beginnings of the digital changeover, I'm talking 2006, 2007, there was only a couple of manufacturers out there that are making little bits to do this kind of stuff with. Genus was one of them. Red Rock was one of them. Zacuto was one of them. Okay. And since then, over time, we've got all these different choices now in manufacturers. I happen to really love this stuff that's made by a company called Small Rig, and it's made in China, but it's their designers are very well informed people that either listen to the customers and they develop the stuff based on customer feedback, or they've started with a really good idea that somebody had who worked in the industry, and they've incorporated that into the products that they're making and selling. So Small Rig is really, they have their ear to the rail as far as the end user, and they make sure that the stuff that they design, things that they offer, are going to do the job for you, right? So let's talk about how you want to deal with your DSLR, like your, I think that is a 60D I got down there, is you might want to start with what we call a bed system, okay? I got one around here. Yeah. Okay, so here's my bed system for my GH5. Okay, it could also work for my GH4. It could also work for the Blackmagic Pocket camera, and probably even the 60D, because it has some adjustment to it to accommodate the physical differences in size between those three styles of camera. But we got a matte box hanging off the front. Here's the rods or the rails running along sort of the bottom. I've got a tripod quick release plate already mounted to it. And then this part back here is the adjustable base for the camera body. And then of course I have a follow focus wheel already attached to the rods. So the rod bed or the rod base is designed to start accommodating all of these different parts and accessories that are going to help facilitate the effective operation of your camera system. Okay, so this is a rod bed for, you know, like a GH5 or a Pocket camera. Okay, I think I've even had the Pocket 4K on here, the new one. I think it works okay, although I have a newer situation for that particular camera, because sometimes there's a slight difference in the lens position in the flange in terms of lens height. So you have to have the ability to either raise the body or raise the matte box to, so that you can keep your lens sort of centered through the system and centered in the front of the matte box. You don't want your lens kind of sitting at the bottom of your matte box looking out through the front, because it might vignette your images on a wide enough angle. I got the Pocket 4K back there. It's kind of hard for me to reach, but I'll show you the Ursa Mini rod bed and use that as my sort of base of my conversation. Different cameras are going to ask for different kinds of cage situations. So this is a half cage, it's called, for either the 60D or the GH5 also has a half cage and a full cage situation. I tend to use full cages. In other words, a full build all the way around, or a really good rod bed with a lot of different places to attach all my peripheral stuff. But one of the things that I really like, which you don't get with this basic bed, is a top handle, right? So the C cage gives you the top handle if you want to go with that. These half cages, as you see here, incorporate a handle into what wraps around to the top of the camera. This doesn't have any wrap around it, so the camera mounts here, the lens goes right through the matte box, and that's just basically it. So then you end up grabbing the rails and grabbing the body as a means of, you know, moving this thing around, as opposed to grabbing a top handle. It all depends on what you're comfortable with. On a big camera though, I can tell you on a big camera, I definitely want a top handle, because it ends up being a principal point of contact for that camera when you're moving it around, putting it on somebody's shoulder for handheld work, or pulling it off a tripod and mounting it on a dolly, or pulling it off a dolly and mounting it on a crane. Whatever it is, you're going to do a lot of manhandling of this equipment. And that's where they, on the heavier cameras, not so much on the lighter ones because they're pretty easy to grab, but on the bigger, heavier cameras or the bigger, heavier builds, you're going to want points of contact that are sturdy and will handle the stresses of moving that camera around, picking it up and putting it down and mounting it all over the place on different support. I showed you the 6-inch sheet cage already. Here's a little clearer photo of it against white, so you can get a sense of what the basic architecture of that cage looks like. And then when you stick a camera inside it, like this is a 5D, that's kind of how it's gonna work. Okay, but you can see how it sort of turns the basic capture device into this much larger system that affords connectability. Here's a place where you can mount a microphone. Here's your top handle situation. You got more mount holes over here where you can attach maybe your audio recorder or something, right? You got your tripod connectivity down here with a quick release plate, and then your rods where you can, this is a version of a follow focus, belt drive follow focus. You can attach your follow focus to your rods. If you want to go handheld, this rod base offers you a shoulder pad and a couple of handles to sort of steer the lens around, and the shoulder pad to help distribute the weight of the whole camera between your shoulder and your two hands. Okay, there's lots of different ways to do this. Okay, here's another version of it. This version also has a provision for an external battery. So a lot of these cameras have their own sort of internal power supply, like the 5D, for instance. If you pop it open, it's using these little lithium battery packs. Okay, and a lot of times, well, like on a GH5, for instance, the batteries are pretty efficient and they last a decent amount of time. So if you have 2 or 3 spare batteries charged up, that's pretty much all you're going to need for the day. And if you're just powering up the camera, then you might just go with onboard batteries. Or you might have a situation like the pocket camera, as lovable and as flexible as it is. The batteries are fairly notorious in the pocket cinema camera, the HD version, of not lasting very long at all. And I can vouch for that. You know, a battery like this on full charge, when you're shooting with it on location, is going to last you 20 or 30 minutes at the most, and then it's going to die and you're going to have to replace it. So given that kind of limitation, you're either going to want to have a bunch of those batteries lying around. In the case of these cameras, if I have 2 of them in a box and I bring them to the beach, I run with 8 batteries to make sure that I have enough batteries to last me for, you know, 5 or 6 hours of shooting, right? Or you can go with an external power supply and something like an external battery pack. Here's a, this is from, well, it's Arctech, but it's also, heck, who are these guys? There's a lighting company that I deal with. I'm totally drawing a blank at the moment. But they make these batteries, and they are what we call Anton Bauer Gold Mount. Okay, so Anton Bauer is a battery manufacturer, but they developed this style of mounting the battery to the back of an ENG camera, and it's called the Gold Mount because these little lugs that attach to the camera body are little brass lugs, and then your contacts for passing power are under this little lobe back here. So this attaches to the back of an ENG camera. It gives you a little battery readout. If it's fully charged, all the little LEDs will light up. And as it gets drained, the LEDs will shut off. It'll give you some idea how much power you have. Dracast, I'm sorry, was the manufacturer that I couldn't remember. So this is the kind of thing where you might want to start figuring out how to adapt an external battery source, a bigger power source, to your camera. So you can not only power your camera all day long, but you might have like I said, a remote follow focus device that you want to power up. You might have an external monitor that you want to power up. You might have, gosh, you might have a wireless video transceiver that you need to power up, things of that nature. And you can run them all out on their own individual batteries, which then becomes a bit of a chore for the camera assistants to constantly be monitoring all the peripherals around your camera to make sure that the batteries are charged up, or you can charge everything off of one central power supply, which is the whole point of these extra, they call them pinches or battery adapters that you can mount to your rod bed. And the one pictured in the photograph here has different power outlets at different voltages for different kinds of devices. So your camera might be a 12-volt device. You'd power it off of the main battery position here. But then you might have an external monitor that's only 7.5 volt, and that would power from here. Might be 12 volt, and it could power from the 12 volt port. And then you might have something like a follow focus transceiver or a video signal transceiver that runs off of 5 volt or 6 volt, and that would power up off of the other power port. So one centralized battery on the rod bed is sometimes a really nice idea if you know you're going to have a lot of extra peripheral parts attached to the camera. Okay, so what was my thing? Oh, Zacuto. I was just talking to you about the different manufacturers of bits and parts. So there's a little bit of Zacuto stuff at UCF. They've been creating parts ever since the red cameras came out in about 2006. Handles, top handles, side handles, rod beds, external power linkages, and so forth, external EVFs, electronic viewfinders. There are also a number of other manufacturers now. Wooden, Manfrotto, Small Rig, Kami TV, Camvate, Camrar, Pro Aim, Shape, Vodka, S-Sim, and Tilta. And those are just the name brands. Excuse me. If you go to eBay or Amazon, there are dozens of Chinese manufacturers out there now that are making the same parts and stuff, which has been really good for the marketplace in terms of the economics. So when Zacuto first started making parts for digital cameras, they didn't have a whole lot of competition, you know. So if you wanted to build a system like this for your GH5 and you went through Zacuto, you know, this business would have cost you well over $1,000, probably 12 or $1,500 all in, right? But ever since the advent of all these newer manufacturers coming out, that, you know, the prices are going down, the competition is going up, and so, you know, you can put a system like this together for relatively cheap, as opposed to what you could say 10 years ago. So it's been a good thing. The diversity has been a good thing for the marketplace. And some manufacturers are better at certain parts than others. Like I said, I have a tendency to check Small Rig first because they have the most selection. If I need some kind of a weird adapter or weird mounting bracket, chances are Small Rig has it. And so I usually go to their website first and check it out. And from there, you know, I might go to Wooden camera tends to be really expensive, so I avoid their products, but Tilta is really good and has a lot of really interesting accessories and parts that they're coming up with on their own. I use a lot of Pro Aim stuff. They're out of India. Camvate and Camrar are out of Canada. In the beginning, Camvate was on the scene pretty soon after Zacuto. So I can remember ordering parts through Camvate in Canada for a while, and having to deal with the shipping and all of that business until it got easier online to buy. But so there's a lot of sources for all this stuff. So when you're building out a camera, you have to think about, like I said, what are you doing? What does the job require? And what camera are you going to build out? So I thought I would, show you some of the parts for the Ursa Mini. So right off the bat, here's the side handle that I've chosen for the Ursa Mini. So the Ursa Blackmagic has their own version of a side handle that they make. And it will allow for record start and stop in the handle and some other stuff, but it requires attaching a cable to the handle. And then the handle, to my taste, is a little bit big and not really ergonomic enough. This one is adjustable this way, just like the Blackmagic, but you can also see that it has some other more ergonomic advantages that the Blackmagic handle just kind of doesn't have, and it sort of fits my hand better, and it's a little smaller physically than the Blackmagic handle. I just like it better, so I chose this handle. You can see I have a side plate attached here, made by Small Rig. There's really not a lot. There's no connectivity on what we would call the dumb side or the motor side of the camera on the Ursa Mini. Just one screw hole to accommodate the Blackmagic side handle, which is right under this silver screw right here. But when you put this side plate on the camera, not only does it provide you with and reallocate the spot for the side handle, but it gives you all this other connectivity as well. So there's a NATO rail sort of plowed into the design of the plate, and there's all these 1/4-20 screw holes that you can mount other things to the camera if you need to, right? And gives you more flexibility than the camera itself has, or the manufacturer's own side handle. And then I got the Small Rig top handle as well. So the Ursa Mini, if I show you the top handle from the Ursa, that's way back here. You can see Blackmagic has their own top handle and their own shoulder pad and rod base that they have, which uses a video ENG mount plate, which I do not like. They're twerky, fiddly, and they're expensive. And you have to buy one the minute you buy the camera. It doesn't come with one. So right off the bat, you're liable for an extra $215 VCT plate, or sham plate as Panasonic calls them. And probably sham for a good reason, because it's a sham. You got to buy this $215 plate just to mount your camera to a tripod. Well, my camera mounts to a tripod with the plate that comes with the Manfrotto tripod. So I could go right away into my tripod if I wanted to, pretty easily, and just lock it down, and I'm good to go. Right. So I could put the camera in the tripod and mount up and get ready to go. But if I need extra accessories and stuff, I got to start thinking about bases. So since I've been doing this for a while now, I have all these different ways of doing stuff. And it's probably been the result of an evolution in my own mind about what I'm comfortable with, how I want to handle the piece of gear, or it could be a base system that's been repurposed from a different camera at a different time. And I keep those things around. I have a big rolling tool cabinet that I've converted into camera parts. And I keep all of my bits and bobs in the cabinet. And I had a bunch of Red Rock stuff that I used to use with the Panasonic HPX 500, the Varicam. And I hadn't used it in a very long time. And when I got the Ursa, I didn't really want to go with the solution that Blackmagic was offering. It's nice, and sometimes it's nice to have all your accessories match from the same manufacturer. But I would rather have it match my purpose than match my branding, right? Because I'm not out there to advance the brand for Blackmagic. They make cameras, and I choose their product to work with, but I'm not a spokesperson, and I'm not getting paid to advertise for Blackmagic. So I don't care if my rod bed and my top handle are the same brand as the camera, right? What I care about is it the handle that I want to work with? Do I like it, right? So the Ursa top handle, which you can kind of see here, it's comfortable. It's got a rubber pad on the underside of the handle itself, which makes it nice to grab onto when you're pulling the camera on and off the tripod. But it's only got these 3 mount holes on the top of the camera. Initially, when they made the top handle system, they were tapped screw holes that went right into the aluminum, and the aluminum is cast, it's not forged, so the threads were fairly weak and they would strip out very easily. And then of course you don't have any mount holes anymore because the threads are all stripped. And then they started putting helicoils in there, which is like a stainless threaded insert that goes into a pre-drilled hole, and they glue that in so that it won't pull out. They epoxy it in, and that gives you a little bit sturdier screw mounting hole that won't strip out as easily. But it is possible to do, and believe it or not, a couple of students actually succeeded in ripping the mount holes out of the top handle of one of the Ursas, and the handle had to be repaired. So I went with the one from Small Rig for a couple of reasons. And the first reason was that I have all of this connectivity on the handle now. These on the side, I've got these mount holes. I got mount holes on the top. I've got airy mount holes in 2 places on the handle. And I've got 2 cold shoes on the handle as well to mount other things like microphones, or my wireless video transceiver can mount up there if I wanted to, or I have a small external monitor that could mount up there if I wanted to. So there's lots of connectivity options with this handle, and it mounts to the camera with 3 bolts on the bottom, and the Blackmagic system itself only mounts with 2. So it's actually a much sturdier handle. It also offers me a 5mm rod receiver here as well, which that is actually what I use to attach my wireless video transceiver to. So I can get it out away from the body, and I can pitch it and angle it for better signal. So it's a better way to connect the video apparatus to the camera. So I went with the Small Rig handle as opposed to the branded top handle from Blackmagic. But, whatever you're comfortable with. So let me put that back there for a minute. So, and then if you look at the bottom of the camera, they have, it's maybe kind of hard to see here. Let me just, let me do this. Let me show you what the BMD rod plate looks like. Blackmagic. Well, let's see. Rod plate and top handle kit. Maybe that'll get me there. There we go. Okay. So if we look at, here's the Blackmagic handle, top handle. See, it's only got two places to mount with, which is it's kind of a problem. And then their shoulder plate, they have a kit actually with the top handle, the shoulder plate, and a hand grip extension. And look at this, $315. So my top handle, I got it used at Adorama for $85, but it's the handle that I wanted. So it was cheaper, and it was exactly what I wanted, as opposed to having to buy it in this kit with 2 other items that I didn't really want or need. I already had this, we call it a dog bone. I already had 3 of these, so I didn't need another one. And I don't like their rod base shoulder plate adapter. So why pay for something that I don't need or I'm not going to use? So this was, cost prohibitive. I didn't want to do that. So I can show you what I do instead. I have my own rod base, which is actually from my original build for my Vericam, and it was made by Red Rock. And so basically it is a standard rod base with just a Manfrotto quick release plate and a place to mount the rods. And I have an airy rosette here on either side of the camera where I can attach a side handle or follow focus apparatus or whatever. But it's adjustable. So remember I talked to you about how the lens base will vary between manufacturers, the height of the lens, the center axis, and how it aligns up with your matte box. So this was really, really important to me because the Blackmagic design camera has its own kind of center. And you don't have to worry if you get the Blackmagic plate with their shoulder pad. But if you don't want their plate, which is $315, and then the VCT plate, which is another $240 on top of that. So you're talking about $550 just to mount it to your tripod. I already had this and it was adjustable, and I already had tons of rods, and I already had this as part of a small rig hand holding bracket. And I've been using the Manfrotto quick release plates now for the last 15, 16 years. And I have these plates everywhere. I have these plates on my tripods. I have them on my car rigs. I have them on my jib. I have it on my crane. It's on my Steadicam. It's on some of my other handheld rigs. I've got a variety of different kinds of handheld rigs. This plate is everywhere in my camera ecosystem. So all I really need is a tripod plate mounted to the bottom of the camera, just this little dovetail, and I can go from device to device, from support to support to support with the same plate on all those different tools. And I don't have to keep disassembling the VCT plate and moving it around or buying a bunch of $240 VCT plates to accommodate all the different devices I have. I just bought these are $50 a piece, and I put them on all of my gear. And then I move the camera wherever I got to move it, and it happens much quicker. It's much more efficient. It's the same way every time, which is important because you train your assistants to do something a certain way, and then they train their replacements, or they train their day players to come in and help how to do this a certain way. And the next thing you know, you have industry standard practices developing amongst different crews, so that people like you guys, when you're going to go out and work in the market and you start doing things, people are going to teach you the best way of doing something, or they're going to teach you their way of doing something. And the two are rarely the same thing. What the industry wants is for all the technicians to know the same way of doing stuff, so that when you get out and hired on different jobs, your job doesn't change and transform based on who you're working with. Your job stays the same. It's just the people that change, right? So I like to use the same parts on all of my gear, so it's the same thing every time, all over the place, and you're not doing different ways of connecting different pieces of equipment to the camera, and it becomes this big, complicated mess that requires special people to do the job. And when they're not available, now you have a problem. So that's the reason for keeping it all kind of standardized. So the rods, the primary function of the rods is to accommodate the matte box. So the matte box is going to hold your cut glass filters, right? So they're going to go in these trays, which I have here. Just loosen the lugs. So these trays, I've got an optical flat in this tray already. So the matte box holds your cut glass filters, and basically here's a clear glass protective cut glass filter. I would use these if we were doing gunfire or car chases and gravel might get kicked up into the lens or whatever. Explosives or ordnance on set where flying debris might hit the lens. Put a clear glass cut filter in front. It protects your expensive cinema lens from being damaged by a piece of flying debris. And that goes right in the filter tray. And then that goes right into the matte box like so. And, you know, that's how you're putting filters in and out of the matte box in front of the camera. And then back here, you can kind of see an interesting magenta reflection happening right here. I have an infrared cutoff filter screwed into the adapter cowling to the matte box. So that filter is there to correct the color saturation and the black density on a digital video camera when you shoot outside. Okay, that's just another filter that I'll talk about probably next week with you guys. Okay, and that goes in here. And what that also does is this cowling, when I adapt it with a step down ring, I can screw it right to the front of my cinema lens. And then the matte box is screwed to the lens, which is attached to the camera, which is also attached to the rod bed and the quick release plate. And it all becomes one solid built unit, which I can move around set wherever I have to. And it's not wonky and flimsy and things aren't wagging off of it, because it's going to get manhandled and thrown through a lot of situations on and off support systems like cranes and jibs and dollies and steady cams. And I want the camera to be securely built so that if you have to grab it here or grab it in a weird way to prevent the camera from hitting the deck, you can grab this rig with confidence at any point where it's built and know that the whole thing is all married together into one mass. Okay, and that's not something that all of these other rod bed systems will offer you, but it's how I like to do it, because that's how the film cameras worked, right? They work the same way. So you don't want to, I don't want to transition from a film work mode into a digital work mode and have to readjust my whole life and outlook to accommodate a digital camera. If I get to do that, then I'm just going to keep shooting film, okay? And it's still around and it's still available, and there are still people that advocate for it. So I wouldn't have any trouble working, but I'm a practical person, and I understand that the digital is here. It's popular. It's powerful and flexible in a lot of ways. Makes my life easier in a lot of ways. But I don't want the ease of the new technology to be offset by liabilities and limitations of switching from one mode to another. So I want all of my stuff to work the same way. Film cameras work the same way as this does. All right, so if I want to mount all of this to my camera, that's not too hard. So we'll just pull the camera back off, and I'll take it, and I've got a lens here that I don't want to deal with right at the moment. So I'm going to put that over here and just mount the camera into the rod bed, just like that. Now the camera is part of the bed system, and all I got to do is decide what lens I'm going to use and attach that here. So if I was to go with, say, let's put that Rokinon on here, I guess. So we'll put the Rokinon on. I just make sure that the mount on the lens that I'm choosing has been adapted or is native to the camera. So the camera has the EF mount on there, which is the Canon mount, the Canon automated mount for autofocus cameras. But it also has aperture control for any lens that was made to work on the Canon camera. So this is a Rokinon Cinema Prime, and I don't need aperture control through the camera. I have it on the lens itself. But like, for instance, this Sigma art lens, the 50mm, has no f-stop ring. So it has to be controlled by the camera through those brass contacts. So that's why you want to have the same mount on the camera with the brass contacts on it, so that if it's a Canon branded lens, it'll still work. But in this case, I'm going with a Rokinon, so that's fine. So I'm just going to mount the Rokinon lens on the camera, turn it till it clicks. And I can do one of two things. I can go with the lens hood that's included with the lens, and that'll help block stray light from hitting the front element, which is nice, but it doesn't give me the cut glass filter option that the matte box does. I can screw filters on the front of the Rokinon lens, but what I don't want to do is start stacking up multiple filters that screw onto the lens, because if I want to remove the one that's in the back, I got to take all three filters off to get to the one I want to change. So I don't want to really make that my workflow, because it's a pain in the butt. So what I'll do is instead of using the lens hood here, I'll use the matte box, which is also, for all intents and purposes, a lens hood, right? It also has internal baffles that will help me cut extra amounts of light away from hitting the front of the lens if I got a real narrow lens on there and I'm outside at the beach, let's say. So those are the adjustable internal mats on this thing. Okay. But it's also a basic lens hood, and then it's a filter holder as well. So we'll mount this to the rods. And then what I'm going to do is take the adapter with the IR filter and just thread that right on the front of the Rokinon, and then attach that whole mess to the matte box. Whoops. Okay, just like that. Tighten it down. What I could even do here, I think, is push that whole business forward like that so the rods don't stick out at the end. Tighten it back down, tighten the matte box back down. And then if I want to use my follow focus, I can add it later or I can add it now. It doesn't really matter, because I use the style that can be added to the rods even after I built the whole thing. Some of these are designed to slide on the rods and they can't be pulled out. So you got to put those on first. You have to decide if you're going to use this piece of gear and then add it to your build. But since I can go from this way of focusing the lens to nothing, or to a remote follow focus motor, I want to be able to remove this from my build without having to disassemble the whole mess. Okay. And then the gear, the drive gear here will line up with the 8mm pitch gear on the lens. And that's how it translates the helical focus motion on the lens to a knob focus motion on the follow focus handle. It turns at 90 degrees basically. So I can add that here. And then just line it up with actually, I got to switch here's another thing about building cameras like this, is you're going to find that the bits and parts are going to have to be adjusted for each camera. So I have my focus gear on what would be the outside of the last lens I was using on this camera. But with this 35mm Rokinon, since the focus gear is shifted backwards a little bit, it's in a different position than the DZO zoom, I have to move the focus gear from this side to this side. And I can do that because there's a gear receiver right here. So all I do is loosen this lockdown bolt. And it's just got a threaded end on it. And I'll take the drive gear from one side and move it to the other side like that. And it's got a little sort of indent you can feel when you line it up. And then I'm just going to thread that back on there to lock it in place. And I know I got it lined up. Now my gear's on the inside, which is better placement for the Rokinon gear, which is here. And when I go back and put that on again, first I lock the follow focus to the bed. Then I spin this to infinity, and I have infinity marked on the wheel. Spin the lens to infinity here, and then line them up so that every time I see infinity marked on my focus wheel here, it corresponds with the infinity marking on the lens. And now I can focus the lens from here. So if you looked at it from the side, I'm focusing the lens on the wheel now. I'm not grabbing the barrel and having to turn it. the markings on the barrel are very small. And if you put your hand over the barrel to focus it, you can't see your markings anymore. So it's nice sometimes to use a follow focus if you're the focus assistant and do your work like that. Okay. But now you can see that this whole unit is one big piece that I can grab anywhere that I have to and not worry about this camera coming apart in the build. And then I just attach my battery to the back side. Here is an Anton Bauer Gold mount, and just attach it back there like that. Now I've got everything built. Now you can see how big this camera got, right? And if I show you, here's the pocket camera, right? You can see now why you might want the bigger tripod, because this weighs 23.5 pounds, okay? But this is a fully built cinema camera, and this is what you're going to be working with, especially in cinematography too. Or if you get on any of the capstone projects that are being shot at UCF, or any of the senior thesis films you're going to be working on, or the master's thesis films for that matter, you're going to be working on this bad boy right here. Okay. And then of course the onboard monitor is here, or you can add a monitor to the system and attach it in an entirely different way. Okay. Now, if you don't want to use that onboard flat screen monitor, there's also an EVF for the camera, and that'll give you an eyepiece to work with, which is pretty nice, especially if you're outside. So the EVF would just mount up here to the top handle, and it locks down. And instead of using the flip out monitor, you use an eyepiece. And for a guy like me, an old film guy, the Arri cameras, the Panavision cameras, they all had optical viewing systems. And so I add this to this camera, and it feels like going home for me. I remember how the camera felt in my hands when I look through the viewfinder and I do what I have to do on set. And it restores my confidence in the camera that I'm using and in the system I'm working within. And it relieves my mind from any anxiety about making a change or adapting to a new way of data capture, right? Of image capture. I just go right into a new system that's digital, and it all works the same the way it used to work when it was a film camera, but it's a digital camera now. And I'm comfortable. I'm teaching my assistants to work with this device, and I'm teaching them the same way I would have taught them if it was a Panaflex. Okay. And as a result of that, they also then learn a way that is easily adaptable to whatever they run into. So if they find themselves on a film shoot, right, they haven't been working with equipment that's different, and then they're on a film shoot and they have to relearn the whole ecosystem just to work with a film camera. There's no time to do that on the job. And if that happens, you may get replaced by somebody who has a different kind of experience, or they may not hire you in the first place if you've never worked with film equipment. So keeping the system consistent with the way the film ecosystem works means that my assistants are more broadly educated as well. Okay. And that's important for them as much as it is important for me and my self-confidence, right? And then I'm confident about my help as well. If my help is confident, I'm confident, my camera is making me feel confident. All of the external pressures from clients and call sheets and big setups or whatever it is kind of melts away, and I can just sort of think about lighting and camera shots and composition, the things that I think I'm good at, and I don't have to worry about damage control, right? Because that's one of the things that is a waste of time and does not reflect the effort on the screen. The only thing you see on the screen is lighting, camera work, and performance, right? So those are the things that I want to be thinking about. I don't want to think about all this other stuff. So you can go with the EVF if you want. I mentioned handheld, right? So this is a hard mounted camera to the tripod. Uh-oh, I need to go handheld. No problem. just take the camera off the tripod. And just like everything else, I got a plate, tripod plate right here. And I got a tripod receiver on a handheld shoulder pad. Pad goes on, camera goes on my shoulder, and I'm probably going to mount the EVF on here so I can put it right up to my eye and focus like so. And I can add handles down here if I want, handles down here if I want. I got a handle here, a side handle here. I can add a dog bone and extend my side handle down to here. A lot of times film guys will just grab the matte box like that, which is another reason why I want it hard mounted to the rods so that you can actually hold it like that, right? And do your handheld and then have your monitor, your viewfinder right here, right? So it's easy to go to handheld by adding that. And when I don't need it, I just take it off. Whoops. Like that. And then I can find my way back to the tripod. Just like so. Okay. So that's why I didn't go with the Manfrotto gimmicks. I went with stuff that I already had, stuff from Manfrotto, stuff from Red Rock, because they've been with me. As far as I'm concerned, those manufacturers have been working as long as I have, doing these things, coming out with products that help me do the job that I do. I trust them. I like their ecosystems. And as long as it's spec'd out for the equipment I'm using and the work I'm doing, I stick with those companies for that reason. Part of my comfort factor, right? You might start developing your own relationships, and that's what's important. I want you to start figuring out what all of this means for you, what cameras you've chosen, build them out based on those choices, and develop your own. This is going to affect your style. It's going to affect the kind of work that you do, and it'll help you build your confidence. All right, what have I got here? What else have I got? I've got we were talking about cages. We're talking about lenses. So I've showed you the Rokinon lens. So the major difference between the cinema lenses and, you know, a lens that's designed to go on, say, the 60D. So I just had this on the on the Blackmagic Ursa. But initially, this lens was going to work on a Canon, because in my other life, before I worked in films, I was a still photographer. So, you know, my equipment has to go on whatever body I decide I'm going to work with. When I'm shooting still photographs, product work mostly, or food, stuff like that, for whatever reason, and I think it's because it's how I started when I was very, very young, but for whatever reason, I don't like an EVF. So I could very easily shoot products and food and whatever I got to do with the GH5, but I don't like looking at the electronic image in the viewfinder. I like looking at the real image that the lens is seeing. Okay, so I'll go to the 60D, which still has 18 megapixels, and that's fine. Or a 5D, which has 21 megapixels, which is a nice image as well. This has a smaller sensor than the 5D. The 5D is a 24 by 36 millimeter, which is full frame. And this is APS-C, which is almost a little bit smaller than the sensor in here. Okay, but this is what I shoot still photographs with. So all of my lenses will go here very easily, just snap them into place, boom. I can also put the Canon EF stuff on the GH5 if I want to. If I've got a lens in Canon EF mount that I really like and I want to use it on the GH5, I just need to get a mount adapter that goes from EF to micro four thirds and maintains the electronic contacts so that any autofocusing or f-stop selection that the still lens wants to do on the Canon will translate to the GH5. So you get an adapter like this. They're not that expensive, anywhere from 30 to 150 bucks, depending on the brand. And you put that on a micro four thirds Canon EF lens, and then you can mount that EF lens on a micro four thirds body. Okay, so if I wanted to shoot with my 11-16 photo lens for some reason, instead of my cinema lens, I use the photo lens. It's got an EF mount on it, so that's not going to go on the GH5. So just pop the adapter on, and now it's a micro four thirds 11-16. And since there's no f-stop ring on here, just a focal length ring, the f-stops are controlled by the camera through these electronic contacts. Okay, so I just went from a Canon EF lens to now a micro four thirds lens. Okay, cinema lenses are different from photo lenses. You see, this is a photo lens, so it has rubber grip surface on the focus wheel and on the magnification or focal length wheel, right? And you manipulate it by hand. That's a throwback to the days of the photographic camera, which was this kind of deal, right? This is what you were doing. You're focusing, adjusting your f-stop, and then ka-chunk, taking the picture, right? So even in the days of autofocus, when the autofocus came along, we're still, if we want to, manually focusing, or we hit a switch on the lens and we go from AF to MF or back and forth, autofocus, manual focus, right? And when you power the camera up, it will focus the lens for you, depending on what you're turning and putting in front of the lens, it'll autofocus, right? Well, autofocus isn't a feature we use over here, but I might like what this lens does, the images it takes, and I do. They're phenomenal. So sometimes I might want to have this lens on that camera. So the lens flange that's native on this lens is EF, electronic, and the native lens flange on this camera is EF, electronic. So I can use this lens on that camera. And that was the whole thought process when Blackmagic developed that camera in the first place. They put the EF mount on there specifically because the darling lens at the time this camera was introduced was the Canon 24-70 Mark II 2.8, which everybody seems to love, the L series wide angle telephoto zoom. So what the end user was telling the manufacturers was basically, we've chosen a lens already as a community. We like the Canon 24-70. We want to continue to use that lens. If you want to sell us a camera, make sure that we can mount that lens to your camera. And so they did. They put the EF flange on the Blackmagic cameras. Most of them, in fact. The small ones have micro four thirds. So the pocket cameras, HD and 4K have micro four thirds, and then the pocket 6K has Canon EF. And then all the Ursas have Canon ES, all the Ursa minis, Canon EF. So, you know, you might have two Blackmagic cameras with two different lens systems at work, and I do. So I have, so my 4K pocket is, let me get this off here, is micro four thirds mount. So it has a different lens flange on it and a different size sensor than this guy. But remember, I said the micro four thirds lens mount was a special mount. Why? This Blackmagic camera can have any vintage lens put on there that I want from my collection of lenses. And I'm limited to what I can put on here. So I have the more flexible lens flange on the smaller version of the Blackmagic camera, so I can choose my lenses a little bit more discreetly. I happen to have a Leica 14 to, what is this, 14 to 50. Very nice, very sharp lens. And I just, you know, have it for the pocket 4K. And when I want to shoot on this guy, there's a similar zoom that goes on this guy with the same focal length range and everything that's comparable to the results I get with this lens in this camera. Okay, so this can effectively become a second camera on set. And I just put the right lenses on both cameras so that the perspectives match, or they're equivalent or compatible or complementary. And I don't have two different weird camera looks from my footage. So I can also go in the Micro Four Thirds from the regular photographic lenses from that. This is from the Panasonic Lumix line, the 20 millimeter. I can go cinema style if I want to. So the same reasons I put the Rokinon on this guy, I can take a similar lens in an equivalent focal length. So that's a Super 35 image sensor with a 35 millimeter lens on there. This is a Micro Four Thirds image sensor, which is smaller. Therefore, the equivalent focal length here is going to be about half of what's over there. So I'm going to take a 16 millimeter lens from a manufacturer called Meika. Okay. And I'm going to put their Cinema 16 millimeter on the Pocket HD cinema camera and have basically the same perspective in this little build as I do in that big build over there. But this lens has the gears on it now for the aperture and for the focus. And that's probably because I'm either going to put this on, let's say I'm going to put this on a gimbal, right? And the camera assistant's not going to be running alongside the gimbal with a follow focus wheel. I'm going to attach a remote focus motor to the lens and have the motor turn the focus gear and have the camera assistant be able to sit back a ways and focus remotely on a remote controller, okay, and pull the focus without having to touch the camera. You don't want to touch the camera if it's mounted to a gimbal because you'll throw everything out of balance, right? So you have to have the camera independent from the focus puller's desire to want to touch the lens and change the focus. So you give them a remote focus and you use the gears, right?
So
And then you mount up.
So potentially you might have a shot on a big set, right? Big proper studio shot. And you've got the black mini, mounted up, all that fancy. And you get the big shot, but you want to match that quality. So you would take the lens from that or use the same lens on a smaller rig to put into a gimbal for the tracking shot or the running shot to go with the action, but still match that same fidelity because you're using the similar lens.
Right. Remember I told you the story about Rodney Charters in the limousine on Dallas? Okay. He couldn't fit two Area Alexas and a director and a camera assistant and an operator and 3 talent inside the limousine. He couldn't have all that in there. So one of the cameras had to become a very small pocket camera that had a very
So as long as the body itself is comparable in its capture quality to
sensor,
something
not the body, the sensor.
Or the sensor, yeah. So
Yes.
So the sensor in the body then.
Yes. Now, the sensor in this camera body is not the same sensor that's in this camera body.
Right.
But they're from the same manufacturer, so they have the same color science. That's important. They are different sizes, so they have different depth of field characteristics and different lens equivalents. So a standard lens with a standard point of view on this camera might be 35 millimeter, but on this camera, it's only 16 millimeter because the sensor is half the size. As long as I use the lenses that are meant for this sensor, right, then I can match these cameras. And you might not be able to tell the difference between the two images, which camera shot what, okay? Because you're adapting the specs to get matching equivalent outcomes, which is different than saying matching the two cameras because they're never going to match. One is micro four thirds and one is super 35. They're never going to match. Physically, they are not the same thing, but the results that they yield can be made comparable or complementary, right? If you want one slightly wide view and one telephoto view, but you want them to have the same color saturation and contrast and all of that, which you pick by brand, yeah, you can do that. Okay. You just need to understand what the tool is that you're using and then put the parts on there that make sense or that will equate to what you need to do. Okay. So some people confuse the notion that only these lenses go on everything. This is Canon EF mount broken on 35. And they say it's a problem because when you put it on the pocket camera, it becomes a 70 millimeter lens. Well, that's true because they're not the same size sensors. So the image circle out of this lens is covering two different size sensors two different ways. If you want it to cover the same way, this lens has to become a 16 millimeter on the little camera. As long as you understand that, then there's no problem mixing ecosystems and combining cameras for their flexibility or in combination to accommodate size and restrictions like that, or weight.
Right.
You know.
So like in the case of the rod bed versus the C cage, so you might want the C cage for a smaller kind of camera. You might want the big or the bed or the rod bed for a different type of shot. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve with the equipment at hand and what all you're going to mount on it.
Yeah.
There's not one that's particularly objectively better. It's just like this works better in this way and this works better in this way. And as long as you're using it correctly, it will give you the right results. Okay.
Said the magic word, objectively better, right? Or subjectively better. The right tool for the right job. Okay. So let's say I wanted to shoot a car chase like what they did in the Bourne Supremacy, right? Or the Bourne Identity. That car got thrashed around, running on top of curbs, crashing into other cars, running through the streets of Berlin, right? You can do that and you can mount cameras to that car and be totally confident that the cameras are going to be okay if the rigs are bomb proof, right? But you don't want to put an open bed rod system like this on a car that's going to go thrashing through Berlin, running into stuff at 35 miles an hour, right?
There's actually a shot. Yeah, when you said car chase, I just thought of this. I remembered back to this amazing French film that came out a couple years ago that I didn't know existed because it's a fully French film, and I wasn't familiar with it. And it is I believe it's Missing Bullet is the title, and it's all about this corrupt guy and these the traffic cops, not speed cops, but chasing down guys that are running the border in Germany, between Germany and France, with drugs and stuff like that. Great movie. And in it, there's actually a scene where normally you would see where an American director might go, okay, well, we're going to flip the car, so we have to see the car flip from the outside. This guy was nuts. He's like, we're going to cut this car in half and then mount an entire camera in it and use a shot of the camera in it spinning. And when you said a bomb-proof rig, I'm like, yeah, clearly you can't just mount the camera in there. You got to really build a whole system out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you from personal experience, I did a movie once where I mounted 3 Arri cameras, 2 heavy BLs and an Arri 3, which is a smaller version, on the front transom of a speedboat. And the scene was shooting this guy steering the speedboat, pulling a water skier in the background, zooming through, I think it was Tampa Bay or somewhere over there, right? Well, okay, so I built the camera rigs and I put the cameras on to test the rigs the night before to make sure that the angles are going to be right. I was the rigging key grip at this time, so I had the DP over there looking at the angles, making sure each camera was capturing what they needed to see. Made sure that the cameras were in the right places, and then I locked everything in, okay, with extra grip hardware and pipe and everything. and I wanted to see what the extra weight would do to the performance of the boat. And I wanted to make sure the rig was sturdy and it wasn't going to shift or move when the boat hit high speed and started bouncing off the water. So the idea was to build the rig out, put the cameras on it, and send the boat out for a test run, right? So they sent the boat out for a test run with a stunt driver, and he turned the wheel over to the actor so that the actor could feel what it was going to feel like to steer that boat, you know, doing high speed across the water. And the actor wasn't used to driving a boat, and he crashed the boat into a piling in the channel. Okay, a big pole sticking out of the water. He crashed the boat into it, and the boat was taking on water, and they got a tow service to get the boat back to the harbor and get it up and out of the water. And when they pulled the boat out of the water, the hull of the boat was cracked, right? So he basically totaled the boat when he hit the piling. And I got the word, I was on set. And so we all kind of went over and, you know, to the stunt coordinator. And the first thing out of my mouth was, oh my God, are the cameras destroyed? Right. And the DP and I were looking at the rig, and the coordinator says, no, the cameras are fine. In fact, the cameras didn't even move, but the boat is destroyed. So the rig was bomb proof, right? Literally, it had to be, because in case the worst case scenario happens, and it did, the actor crashed into a piling and destroyed the platform that the cameras were mounted to. But the rig was so sturdy and it was so well locked in, the cameras were fine. Okay. And that's really, you know, that's what we're doing when we rig like that. So the sea cage has all these places where you can add extra arms and really lock that thing into a side mount or a hood mount or something on a car, and feel good about that running down the road and having that camera not be at risk, right? Sometimes I get a little queasy when I see a suction cup rig, because intellectually I know if I make the camera small enough and light enough, right, the suction cup rig will be okay. And you can add some supplementary arms to lock it to the car if you really want to. But I know that it'll be okay. But would I put that on a suction cup? No way. Absolutely not, because it wouldn't make it. It wouldn't last the trip. Okay. The camera would go tumbling, and I can't afford that to happen to my reputation. I can't afford that to happen to the production company, because these cameras are very expensive to replace. And I can't have it happen on a production day where it's going to set us back in our schedule because we have to reshoot something because a camera got wrecked. I can't have those risks attached to what I'm doing. So I qualify the rig and the camera and the piece of gear to what I'm doing. Okay. Now, this is my principal camera on a movie. But if I have to rig a camera to a motorcycle and have the guy go tearing off down the street, right? Like Ryan Gosling in what was that movie? Into the Woods or something. Am I going to put this on a motorcycle? Probably not. I'll put it on a car and I feel pretty good about it, but I probably won't put it on a motorcycle. So I need to know how to make this become a motorcycle camera, right? Or the other pocket, the 4K, right? Because this is small and much lighter than this. And I would put this on a motorcycle any day of the week, right? And I know I can do remote focus. I can do remote aperture if I want to. I can mount this thing to a motorcycle and not have it be too big and heavy and offset the balance of the bike and make it life difficult for the stunt driver. I can put this on a motorcycle all day, and I would never put that on a motorcycle unless I had certain other supplementary gear, which you probably won't have on a small movie. Okay. So this is all about knowing what your tools do and qualifying the job, and then using the right tool for the right job. All right. So as far as lenses go, that's basically the talk. It's, you know, rubber hand grips versus gears and teeth for other apparatus to accommodate the lens, like follow focus, remote focus, things of that nature. The cinema lenses oftentimes will have bigger barrel diameters, right? I showed you the length of the focus twist on the Rokinon 35. The focus twist on a little photographic lens is, you know, very minimal. Like the distance between say 5 feet and 10 feet, that's it, right? I mean, it's not much. That makes life really, really difficult for a focus puller if their changes are so small like that, that they can be off that much will put them so far badly off, the image will be totally unusable. That's a lot of stress and a lot of added responsibility that you can relieve by using a cinema lens that has a longer focus throw, we call it, so that, you know, it takes longer to get from 5 feet to 10 feet. I have a big one around here somewhere. Yeah. So here's a 50 millimeter Canon cinema lens, right? But on this focus scale, look at the variation on this focus scale. How much variation there is. Here's 5, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10. Look how far that barrel is traveling to go from 5 to 10. It's a lot easier to make that focus change on the fly while the camera's rolling on a lens with a barrel that this is 114 millimeters across. Here's the Olympus photo lens at 49 millimeters across. It's a whole different thing. The size, the difference in size is directly related to how much distance that focus wheel turns when you're trying to follow focus. Now, if you're a still photographer and you're photographing LeBron James at a basketball game, you know, the quick response of a photographic focus throw is nice because you're always within a few millimeters of travel between what you need and out of focus, and bang, bang, bang. You can get this really quick if you're, excuse me, if you're focusing manually. If you're autofocus, the same principle applies. The camera's working less hard to get that lens to capture all those minor adjustments. But if it's a movie, that kind of control is different. We have different ways of focusing the lens and for different aesthetic reasons, right? We don't need focus to thrash into sharpness and out again in a movie. Well, maybe we do, depending on the script. But for the most part, we like focus to kind of feather in and arrive, feather out and feather onto something else. Focus throw from the foreground to the background. In order to get that kind of subtle control, we need a longer turn on the lens so we can develop a timing in our head. As a focus puller, you have a timing, foreground, background, picks up the glass, sets it on the bar, right? You have, you're doing a dance with the action and following it with the lens, okay? And so you want that, it's a coarser control, really. It's you have to turn the lens a lot further on a cinema lens to get the transition to happen, but it's a dramatic rate of change that we like. We like to see an image, you know, there's a shot that Studio Binder does on the internet, on YouTube, talking about follow focusing, and it's when it's in Casino Royale when when Bond enters the hotel room after the first round of he's playing cards with the bad guy, right? And he gets into his room and he had called ahead to order a cocktail. When he walks into the room, they shift the focus from Bond looking at the bar to the cocktail on the bar, right? And you want that to sort of happen, not go whack, you know, because it's too jarring for the audience. And the audience doesn't have time to process what that transition really means. He really wants that drink. He's really stressed out because he knows that this guy is a really good card player and he better bring his A game or he's not going to have he's not going to win. and woo, he sees the booze and oh, he grabs it and throws it back, right? We want to have that timing and control with the cinema lens that the photographic lens just won't give us.
Right.
Okay?
And then later in the film, Mad Mikkelsen's character, when they're in the big, I assume it's some sort of ship or something. It looks industrial. And they
Yeah.
got the guy in the chair and they break the chair out, and they've got the focus on Mad's big close up. His face is filling the screen, and then as he turns away to go, it just has that really subtle focus pull back to the center of the room. You barely even notice
Yeah.
it because it's just whoop, done, simple.
Yeah.
It's
So
a really good video.
that's the kind of control that we can have with cinema lenses. Now, if you're not doing focus throws, and if it's just like locked off, someone's just sitting there talking across the table and there's plenty of depth of field and they're not moving in and out of the shot. It's a loose close up and you just need to get that piece of coverage. You can probably shoot that just fine on a photographic lens and never be able to tell the difference because there's not a lot of dynamic motion happening. The minute you start having dynamic motion in performance, that's when you might find your lenses are not cut out for the work if they're photographic lenses versus cinema lenses. It's a matter of mechanics, not a matter of quality. This lens is every bit as sharp as any of my cinema lenses that I have. I use them for that reason. They are impeccable optics. Olympus OM series glass that has been made since the early 70s, late 60s is amazing. And depending on what generation the lens is, and I have two different generations. My lenses built in the 70s have a warm quality that my lenses built in the 80s don't have. They have a harder, sharper, more Zeiss clinical looking look to them. And they're both from the same manufacturer, but different manufacturing eras. And I might want that look for a specific reason. So the quality of the glass itself is not what's in question. It's the mechanics of how the glass is operated that may be a challenge with this lens and not with a cinema lens. Okay. It's mechanics, not glass quality. Okay. And I want to make that very clear because there's a lot of people on YouTube that say, oh, cinema lenses are better. Why are they better? They're made by the same manufacturers. They're made under the same tolerances. 35 millimeter, let's say 50 millimeter biotar in the Zeiss factory is the same grind, whether it's a photo lens or a cinema lens. It's the same glass optic going in the device. The difference will be the mechanics of the device wrapped around the glass. One is put into a contact lens for a still camera, let's say, and the other might be put into a cinema lens for an Aeroflex. Okay. The quality of the lens is not in question. The mechanics have to be applied to the situation. That's all. That's all it is.
If the concern is on the mechanics of the particular lens, wouldn't it be prudent for these companies to create a lens? So possibly, I mean, I'm probably going to sound like an idiot here, but wouldn't it make sense to make a piece of the lens in just the front or just separate from the actual mechanism so that you can still shoot through the lens, but the aperture mechanism itself would be adjustable. So if you want a tighter control, you could just swap out the mechanism itself. I mean, I'm not sure of the science, but
that would be a manufacturing conundrum. That's not to say that maybe in the future they may do that very thing, but for now, at least, you buy your lenses to match your ecosystem. So if your ecosystem is cinema operation, you really should be buying cinema optics. If your ecosystem is photographic, then you buy photographic optics. Now, you can use cinematic optics in a photographic situation. The only caveat might be that instead of having nice tactile rubber control, you got to handle the lens by the gears, which, for some people might offer some level of anxiety that they don't want to deal with, because these gears on these, they're very nicely deburred, but they could be sharp and could, cut your fingers over time, I suppose, instead of a nice rubber focus grip. But, you can do it. And as obviously demonstrated, you can put a photographic lens on a cinema camera. Just understand what those challenges might be and then deal with it. And here's how you deal with the photographic glass. You got your follow focus, right? It's designed to work with your cinema lens because it has a drive gear that matches the pitch gear on the lens. All right. But if you don't have a cinema lens, you can put a pitch gear on a photographic lens like this, and it will do two things. It will offer you pitch gearing on your lens to match your focus wheel. And it will, as you can see here, increase the diameter of the turn, kind of like changing gears on a bicycle. Here's the diameter of the photographic lens in here, but the diameter with the cine gear is like 2 inches wider. So that it's changing the gear ratio. It's making the gear, the focus throw longer by increasing the diameter. Do you understand how that works?
Yeah.
So, this is what
yeah,
you
I was
do.
actually, when you were talking about it earlier, I was going to, ask about that. If why don't they use a mechanism that would convert that? And I thought it was just a really silly question, because it's like, well, if you're going to bother converting, you might as well just go buy a cinema lens at that point, because then it's all ready to go. But yeah, you can get something that will allow that conversion.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's one version. Here's another version. It's a soft rubber. So this version is a hard plastic focus gear, and this is a rubber focus gear, and you can trim off the excess. If you wanted to mount this on a lens and just leave it on there permanently, you could do that and trim off the extra. Or the same gear can be used for lenses with different diameters. And you just dial in how much you need and lock it down with this little wheel up here. So either way is possible to do. It's a little clumsy. We all did that in the beginning, of the digital age, because, if you were going to adapt a lens, the video cameras all had built-in lenses, kind of like the way the FZ1000 has a built-in lens. So if this was a ENG camera, it would have a built-in lens. And what we would have to do is add a special adapter that would mount to the front of the existing lens, so we could add an additional lens to it that would give us more cinematic depth of focus and focus control and everything. And so we would use those kinds of focus adapters on the video cameras, and then we would use photographic glass on the adapter and use one of these two forms of focus gearing to accommodate your follow focus wheel. And that was what we had to do for the first, 5 years that digital was out there, kind of fighting for its place in the industry. And it was a bit of a Rube Goldberg, but we did it because that's what we had to do if we wanted to exploit the new technology and see what it was capable of. But after 10 or 12 years of working that way, you kind of get sick of dealing with it, because everything is 3 parts instead of 1. And it's a lot of fiddling, it's a lot of adding to something to make it work. And if you don't have all the parts, you're in trouble. And if you forget something on a job, you don't have the focus gears, all of a sudden they got left at the shop, and now you're a mess, right? So I've gone full circle in the way I use gear now, which is, if I'm shooting video, I want cinema lenses. That's it. I don't want to screw around with adapting anything. At the most I want to do is adapt a micro four thirds mount from an EF mount. That's the most work I want to do. Beyond that, I don't even, and in some cases I don't even want to do that, which is why I ended up buying a whole system of Meka cinema primes in micro four thirds. So I don't have to even deal with lens adapters anymore, changing Rokinon EF to micro four thirds. I'll just go to the micro four thirds lenses for the micro four thirds camera and the EF lenses for the EF mounted camera. And that's just how I'm going to live my life. And the only thing I got to know is what lenses equal what lenses on what cameras with what chip size. That's all. And that's pretty simple once you're used to thinking back and forth like that. You just understand micro four thirds is twice what EF is. So if I'm on a 50 on the Ursa Mini, I need to be on a 24 on the GH5. Done. No more thinking, right? No more adapting, no more fiddling with little bits and parts. I just go right to the lens that I need to use. And as long as you think that way, you'll never have a problem. So all of the conversations that are out there about people that are saying, you know, full frame cameras versus micro four thirds cameras, which one's better and why, you know, it's all a lot of hogwash. Okay. The only possible advantage a larger sensor has over a smaller one is its low light performance. That's it. You can get the same depth of field characteristics if you use the right lenses and the right focusing distances. You can get this, you can match contrasts, you can match color saturations, you can match resolutions, you can do everything else same, if that's what you want to do. Okay. So that conversation is absolute bollocks as far as I'm concerned. Okay. You just need to understand how the tools work and then you're good to go. Having said that, I'm going to skip over the audio section because like I said, I don't really want to dwell on audio. But I've given you a couple of nice audio videos to look at in web courses by a couple of really great guys. Curtis Judd is one of them. Whose opinions I respect a great deal in terms of equipment for audio. I've bought microphones and recorders based on feedback from Curtis. So I find his opinions very useful. So he's got a couple of videos in here on recorders and stuff. And we've covered slates, really. We covered those last week, so I don't really need to keep going on those. But just understand the difference between like a dumb slate that marks without time code and then a slate that uses time code. And the difference is basically in the days of film where we had a separate roll of mag film and a separate roll of picture film that had to be lined up on a flatbed editor in post, we used the clapper to create a point that would match visually with the audio snap of the sticks. And so the audio snap would be lined up with a sync point on the film that showed the exact point the sticks came together. And that's how we lined up the sound with the picture. All right, now it's done digitally. Like if you have plural eyes or something like that, you can go through and the software will immediately fix. If you have, for instance, a piece of a clip where you've unlinked the audio and the video and you've slipped the video around somehow in your editor, and now the audio doesn't line up anymore, you can line it up really quickly with a plugin and you don't have to worry anymore. But once upon a time, you had to worry about the sync point, and it was a whole bit of craft work that if you knew how to do it, you can make good money as an editor in Hollywood. So that's really what slates are all about. Here's a really old timey one. Showing you what they used to look like. And the reason we call them slates is because they used to be made out of slate. They used to be like little chalkboards, and you'd use a piece of chalk to write the scene and take numbers down there. And then the sticks are pretty much the same. They're just a little smaller. But this is one of the original slates that the guys used to have to deal with. And these were used up until as far as the industry is concerned, fairly recently, up well into the 70s, they were still using these big bulky slates. So these smaller acrylic slates are kind of a, you know,
I just love the concept that somebody was like, all right, we need this thing to sync up the sound and the video. Great, we'll clap it together. Big board thing, awesome. And for decades, nobody sat down and said, do we really need this thing to be the size and shape of a small end table?
well,
it's so like you could write that just a little bit smaller
if
and
you
save a lot of space. It's just this giant thing. That's all. That's kind of awesome to think that somebody was actually out there just.
If you understand the history, then the answer will become clear. A long time ago, the cameras were enclosed in a giant soundproof housing, and the camera operator did not have the benefit of actually seeing what the camera was seeing. There was no optical pathway, no viewfinder he could look through and see exactly what the lens was seeing. So they would put like a big, like an old aircraft gunner's target box on the side of the camera with a crosshair and a grid. And they would basically have to line up the focus, whatever you want to call that thing, with what the lens was seeing. And there was a parallax, right? So the slates were a lot bigger in those days because the camera operator was kind of guessing where exactly is the center of that slate. So if you give him a nice big target to aim at, he doesn't have to worry about, you know, cropping half of the slate out of the frame. And then you don't know until two days later when you get the rushes back and the labs developed your film and you realize, we cut off part of the slate. We don't know what take number that was, right? Is if you notice, really, really old timey movies don't have a lot of tight shots or inserts, do they? They got a lot of wide shots. That part of the reason for that is because the camera operator didn't know what the camera was actually shooting. He had a best guess with a special, you know, a viewfinder to assist. And beyond that, he was accounting for parallax and he was hoping and praying that, we call it spraying and praying, hoping that you get the image that you think you're getting, you know, and practice makes perfect, obviously. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. But that's why the slates were so big in the old days, is because the cameras were so limited. So fun piece of trivia. I showed you DigiSlate. The only thing left to talk about is chip charts, and that's pretty much it. So a chip chart looks kind of like this. And what you can do, and we use these even now, even in the digital age, because there's a disconnect between life on set and life in post-production. Okay. And sometimes post-production might happen in a totally separate city from where shooting is taking place. So the DP has an idea of how the image is going to look because of the way they've used filters or the way they've exposed the image, right? And then they send all their footage to the editor and the post-production pipeline. And there's a colorist who's not the same person as the editor, okay? In my world, right? The editor just cuts and the colorist adjusts the color balance on each of the clips, right? So as the clips are coming in from the service bureau, which is transferring them from set to the post house, the colorist is going to take a look and do a basic color pass. How do they know what color red a dress was in a city 500 miles away? Well, in the beginning of the scene, or preferably in the beginning of each data card, or even in the beginning of each different shot, they would use a chip chart and just shoot it for a couple of seconds, because how the camera renders that chip chart with these predetermined specific color densities, the post colorist can calibrate their system so that it renders this red the same way as it was shot. And in that way, then the colors become a lot easier to match and correct to what they were supposed to look like before they start adding any nuance, any adjustments to that color and contrast. They want to start from perfect rendition, which is dictated by these predetermined little chips right here, these samples. So if you take a chip chart and just shoot it for a couple of seconds, maybe you do it on your master shot, right, of a scene. And if your whole data card is only one scene, then you really only have to do a chip chart at the head of that data card, maybe the first thing you record, and maybe the last thing you record before you change cards. But you don't have to do any more than that. But if you have several, 3 or 4 scenes on the same data card, you want to do a chip chart for at least for each scene, if not for, masters versus inserts, or, I don't think you can overshoot it, but the colorist is going to need at least one good chart from each specific camera setup, right? Master, close, one chip chart. Master, close, reverse, master, close. Maybe you want to do 2 chip charts. If the background is significantly different in the second bit of coverage, requiring a lighting change, you probably want to do another chip chart. And then you can help your colorist nail your color a lot more quickly in post-production, which ultimately results in lower costs in post-production as a result. Okay. So chip charts are really important. This particular one also has a grayscale on it, so they can get an idea of the tonal rendition of the camera as well as the color rendition of the camera on the same chart. Okay. So this one's telling you really how well your exposures are working. If they're perfect or too bright or too dark, this scale right here, and consequently this scale, will tell you or inform you whether you're shooting things overexposed or underexposed or right on by looking at these grayscales. Because if you're overexposing, these two values might look the same. And you'd be like, well, wait a minute, these two values should be distinct. If they're not, then the exposure was off. And if we can correct it in post, we will, or it might be sacrificed because the camera operator kind of screwed up, right? So the top part is to help you with exposure, and the bottom part is to help you with your color saturation and accuracy. Okay. So this can be a very handy tool. You can pick them up on Amazon for, like, this one here was 13 bucks. So the one I use, I've had for a number of years, cost me 50 bucks from Panavision. It's a Macbeth color checker. It has, very color accurate chips that have been manufactured in the lab, and they embed them on the card. I keep it in plastic and try to keep it out of sunlight and humidity. But they are perishable over time. So I probably ought to start thinking about replacing mine. And you can buy them now pretty cheaply off Amazon. So it's not a big deal anymore. It's not 50 bucks anymore. So I would recommend that you have one of these. And then, you can buy the slates on Amazon too. This one was only, look, $11.80. It's made in China, but it still works the same. It's two sticks that slack together and an acrylic card that you can write your information and then dry erase it with a marker and a little cotton pad, right? That's all you need. Those two things as an assistant, you can put in your little kit. So when you go on these jobs and stuff, you're kind of ready to go. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk to you about today in terms of gear and customizing gear and playing around and getting all this to work. I know it's a lot of information. There are videos that you can double back on web courses and check out if you have to. I will put today's lecture underneath the pre-recorded one. So this one was from February. I'll put today's down here. And then you'll also have any of the important videos from the lecture are restated here, and a couple that I didn't cover in the lecture, like external monitors. Here's one that I did for you on external monitors. Here's one on Atomos external monitor recorders, which some of you might be interested in. And then here's another nice video describing audio gear. So there's a number of videos here for you to check out. And then let me make sure I gave you the Ursa Minis manual. It might be next week that the FZ1000 PDF is there and downloadable. You can check it out. It should be open and available to you now. This is a set of checklist forms by the same author as your camera assistance textbook. So Dave Elkins has created things like camera reports and rental checklists and damage reports and stuff like that. It's a packet of stuff, I guess, and you can download it here at this link. Okay, so there's that, and then your reading assignment from your textbook is here, and this will be about building cameras and testing cameras in pre-production, getting ready, preparing for the shoot. Okay, so that's here. And that's it for the section, I believe. Oh, there's a discussion post for you guys to do, a little assignment. What I want you to do is take today's discussion and consider the kind of tools that you think you're going to be using in the work that you're going to be doing, whether here at UCF or now and after you graduate, or talk to me about the cameras that you already use, or talk to me about the cameras that you want to use when you get out of school. Okay. And think about it in terms of the work that you're doing, the work that you want to do, and the specs, or what kind of camera you think is going to be best for the kind of work that you're going to do, and tell me about it, and put it in a discussion. So there's a discussion post for you, and I think you got to submit it by, today's Monday, so I think it's, yeah, it says Friday of this week. Friday for your initial post, and then Sunday for your responses. So you want to respond to 2 of your classmates by Sunday night at midnight. Okay. Friday night for your initial post. That'll give everybody time to read what's up there on the discussion forum. And then you get 2 more days to respond to 2 people. Okay. Pretty simple, I think. And I think that is it. Yes, that's it. And then we go to lenses on Wednesday. Okay. So that's the discussion for today. I almost took you to the wire. Sorry about that, but that is the summer B situation. We end up sitting in class a lot longer. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I've covered today? Have I completely buried you in minutia to the point where you just want to go have a drink now?
I need a nap.
I need a nap too. I didn't get any sleep last night, but aside from that, so hopefully you don't need a nap because I bored you to tears. Hopefully you just need a nap because you've done some really good work and a lot of brain work today. Any concerns or questions about the stuff that I'm bringing up to you? Any thoughts or responses?
Yeah, that's another question. Will the PowerPoints be posted in Canvas at all so we can go back and look at them?
Oh yeah, somebody asked me about that. I will put the PowerPoints up. Yeah, I think what I'll do is make a page in your startup menu and put them all over there. So I'll make a page called Decks, and then you'll just go and look for the day or the week that you want to see, and it'll be in there.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? I know I covered a lot of stuff, so.
Ballpark price wise, how much do you think one of those pitch gears would cost to like put on like a non-cinema lens?
Like that plastic one I showed you?
Right.
Those,
Yes,
you know, that's actually a 1st generation Red Rock pitch gear. If you go to focusgears.com, there's a guy that is making, he's 3D printing focus gears. So he's got a bunch that he's already designed and prepackaged for key lenses that are out there floating around in the industry that people like to use. But the beauty of his system is if you got something weird and you want a pitch gear for it, as long as you know how to work a caliper and you can take a precise measurement of your barrel diameter at the focus wheel and send him those measurements, he can print you anything you need. And his lenses are seamless. So you know how the Red Rock gear had kind of a, what do I want to say? It has like a, let me show it to you again. It has a, hello. Oh, I made my thing too big. It had a, where is it?
I think it has something where you could like tighten it down on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This whole screw system. So this can get in the way if your lens has a long focus throw. Like some photographic lenses, like the Zeiss Contax, they have long focus throws on them. So sometimes this little bit here where you actually tighten the gear down around your lens barrel, it can get in the way and then it causes you a problem. The nice thing about focusgears.com, that guy, his gears are seamless. There's no more screw tightening down going on. And so the whole thing slips on with a specific, that's why you have to know how to work a caliper. If you know your specific barrel diameter, it just kind of slips on. And when it gets to the point where the focus wheel engages, it snugs up real nice because it's exactly the right size. And you don't have to worry about tightening it down. And so you can turn that barrel a lot further with a focus gears assembly than you can with like a Red Rock assembly. Okay. So I would check out that guy.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check them out.
Now,
Absolutely.
the difference is, the caveat is, focusgears.com, his stuff is more expensive. You can spend as much as $50 on a focus gear through that guy. And the Red Rock gear you can get on Amazon for like $12. So it all depends on what lens you want to put it on. And, I would start with the cheap one and then, grow out of it at some point. Instead of investing in the expensive one, which is for one specific size. So in other words, you have a range of sizes technically that this gear will accommodate, because this is an air gap right here that opens and closes based on how tight you make this screw. So a lens barrel that varies, any two lenses that might vary, say, as much as 5 millimeters in diameter, can be used. You can use the same focus gear on a variety of lenses. The exact measured focus gears only go on that one lens. And you spend more money doing that. So I would go with the cheaper solution first, see how it works, see if it even makes sense or feels right for you to be working that way. You might not like it. I was okay with it initially because I had no choice. But the minute I had a choice, I was like, yeah, these got to go. I mean, I got a bag of them back, in my closet that I don't use anymore. I think I used to pay like $30. If you got 3 different sizes, it was like $30 for 3. And I probably got, a couple of dozen of them back there. So it was a lot of money. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to work this way anymore. I just don't want to do it. But after you've been doing it for a while and you decide what you like and what you don't like and what you're willing to tolerate, you tolerate things for 2 different reasons: budget or creativity, right? If budget ceases to become the problem and that focus gear is impairing your ability to work the way you want to work and create the way you want to create, then it's time for a change. But you won't know that right away. So I would start cheap and work your way up.
Yeah, budget is what I'm facing right now.
Yeah, man. You know what? And I'm at the point now where it's like, I don't want to spend any more for this crap than I have to, because anything that you need to do your job that is in any way attached to the movie industry has a retail price on it that's 2 to 3 times more than it would be for any other walk of life. All right. And all you got to do to prove that to yourself is fabricate something on your own. Go to a machinist, right? Like there's been times when I needed something for a camera that just did not exist yet, but I knew in my mind what it looked like and how it needed to work. And if I made a blueprint, a drawing of a mechanical drawing, and I would take it to somebody and they'd build it for me, and then they'd give me the price, and I would be expecting, thousands of dollars, and they'd come back with a very reasonable price. I understood that the real world doesn't think about what we do in terms of making an exorbitant profit based on the mere fact that it has to do with movies, right? But the minute it's a movie manufacturer from movie industry, the retail price goes through the roof, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm tired of being abused like that. So I'm all about finding the cheapest solution to all of these problems as I can possibly find. And I'm repurposing a lot of stuff. So, I spent 30 years buying little bits and bobs, and I don't throw them away or lose them or lose track of them. I keep them in a big road box. And if I do a movie, the road box rolls out of the house and into the camera truck, and all of my junk is there. And if I have to rig something on the fly and make it up as I go, I just start opening drawers and look, what have I got to work with? How can I rig this and make it work? Okay. Tinker toys for grownups is what I call it, but over time that, if you keep track of this stuff and make smart choices, or you end up spending a lot of money you don't have to spend. Like my tripods, $3,000, but I bought them 16 years ago and I still have them. And there's a lot of sexy ads out there for O'Connor legs and Sackler legs, and you can have the latest, greatest Sackler head. And I'm like, so does it do 25 pound camera? Well, no, it's 20 pound, but no, I need this. So I'm going to stick with it. You can spend $3,000 on one modern Sackler tripod, and do it if you want to, but I'm all about, staying cheap, buying used, making smart choices, and don't buy more gear than you need. buy just enough to do the job, and only buy it if you're going to go on a job and somebody's going to rent it from you. Or buy it if by having it, it's going to get you the job, and by not having it, you might not get the job. Those are the only two times you should buy gear. Don't buy it just because it's fun to play with, because it's expensive. If they're going to rent it from you, though, by all means, buy it, because you're going to rent it to them and they're going to pay you for it. And ultimately you end up getting that piece of gear for nothing. Right. And that's a good way to acquire gear, free, you know, essentially.
Yeah, buying gear is an investment for sure.
Absolutely. And remember, always remember, you're a filmmaker now, or you will be when you get out of here. And if that's your vocation, as far as the IRS is concerned, that's what you do for a living. Then if you buy camera gear, it's a tax write-off. Cha-ching. And we like that, right? Magically reduce your bottom line so you pay less taxes on what you make, right? That's the name of the game, keeping the money.
Now, if you buy camera equipment and you rent that out, do you still get the tax write-off for the equipment, or you still wouldn't get that?
Yeah, because like I made the initial investment, so that's my tax write-off. But every time this camera goes out, it needs to be rented. And when it's rented, it starts paying me back on that initial investment. And the rule of thumb is like 10 to 1, right? So if I rent this 10 times, it should pay for that camera. So I have to figure the cost of that camera and divide it by 10, and that's roughly going to be my rental rate. So if the camera costs me $1,000 to buy, then I should rent it for $100, right? And then you might offer incentives beyond that. So like, if you really got to do a deal with somebody to get a gig, you know, they might ask for a discount. Well, you can give them a 10% discount, 20% discount, you know, and rent it to them for 80, you know, and then it'll take you a little longer to pay your investment back. But that's kind of how it works. That's, you know, if all you want to do is make an hourly for the work that you're doing, you're never going to get ahead that way, right? And they're always going to be willing to dicker with you about what that hourly is, right? But if they need a camera, they got to rent it from somewhere. They might as well rent it from you, right? And then you give them a fair price on the rental. Then you're making your investment back, and you're making your hourly. And eventually, after this camera is paid for, every time you rent it, you're making like extra money, double money, triple money, right? That's when you get ahead. That's what it is to be an owner operator in a business like the film industry, right? You can work for an hourly wage and you'll never get anywhere economically, okay? Or you can own your equipment pack, own the tools that you want to work with, and then rent them to production wherever and whenever possible, and make extra money, make your money back that way, right? And prioritize what you buy. Like cameras are the worst investment. Lenses are a great investment. Why? Because lenses, as hopefully as I've demonstrated to you, can be adapted to virtually any camera, but cameras are specific things. And when they decide they don't want to play with that toy anymore, it's going to sit and collect dust and nobody will rent it from you. So you've got 2 to 3 years tops to make your money back on a camera body before it becomes a bad investment. And you'll make money off your lenses for your entire career if you make the right choices. Okay. So glass checkmates camera bodies. Accessories are always a good value, and they will make you money forever, because filters are filters are filters. Nobody is out there really innovate. They say they're innovating diffusion filters and everything, but it's a lot of bollocks, because something that they call a Hollywood Superfrost right now, 50 years ago, might have been called a Wood Superfrost. It's the same filter. And if you know the difference, why would you pay $300 for the new one when you could pick the other one used up for $40, right? So this stuff will keep making you money, and it'll last you your whole career. Like I said, I modified my Red Rock base plate to work on my Blackmagic camera, and it used to work under my Vericam. Well, it's still a good base plate, and the key was it was adaptable, and I had a bunch of shims I just needed to change the relationship of the center of the lens to the lens port on the camera by shimming up the rods on the base plate, and bam, a plate that cost me $1,800 15 years ago just saved me 315 in 2021, right? So not only did I rent it back over the course of its lifetime and make the money back and then some, it now also just saved me 315 more dollars, right? Just by keeping it in my road box and not, you know, and not getting rid of it or whatever. Support will always help you no matter, you can change the camera out. You still need a good tripod. You still need good lenses, good accessories, rods and crap, right? And then just change out the body when the technology gets better or when the industry decides that there's a different darling for the dance now. You know, even guys that bought red cameras, they bought the red one in 2008, let's say, and spent through the roof for it. And they're still trying to pay that camera back in 2021. And there's been 6 generations of red cameras since then, and they do nothing but getting more and more expensive as they go, right? If you can't make your money back on a piece of gear, don't buy it, rent it. And then the rental is a tax write-off. If you need it and you don't got it, then you got to rent it. And the rental cost is a tax write-off. And if wherever possible, pass the cost on to production. Because it's their movie, not yours. So they should be paying for it, not you. I'll talk more about stuff like that in your capstone class before you guys are ready to graduate, when you're all seniors. Talk more about making money and being a business. But you should be thinking about that now. You should think that way now, so that it's not a big shock to you and there's no learning curve that happens quickly at the end of your career when you're, you know, think about being a business now so that, you know, you'll develop good habits now, make good moves now, good investments now. And the other thing about gear is you can spend as much money on gear as you want. Okay. And there's manufacturers out there that will do it. If you want to buy it, they'll sell it to you and they'll tell you, you got to have it, and they'll make it all sexy, right? And they'll show it off at the trade shows and get all the magazines to gush all over it. And everybody will be chattering about it on YouTube and, oh, this is the best camera so far, right? And you might want to go out and buy it, but if you don't need it, don't buy it. Save as much as you can, because the film industry, like everything else, is a castle made of sand. And sometimes it's over sooner than you think. And you might want to have a little money, or you go through a dry spell where you don't work and you'll need that savings to fall back on. So don't spend everything that you got on camera gear. It changes every other year anyway. So, you know, don't get stuck with a bad investment, and don't overspend so you don't have anything in savings. Okay. That's it. That's all I got. I'm fresh out. Any questions left out of that whole business?
I just wanted to say, like, you're like a modern day filmmaker MacGyver.
Out of necessity. Sometimes out of necessity, but I was always really I really enjoy the problem solving of, you know, like rigging a camera, for instance. I always used to get an absolute thrill out of that. Rigging a camera in a place that logically my brain's going, don't do it, it'll break, it'll be a disaster. And then figuring out how to get that shot, rig that camera and have it work. You know, I love that. You know, anything where I get direct feedback on my effort. You know, pushing a dolly is the same adrenaline rush, you know, because that camera move is happening as that image is being created, and it will never be the same way twice, as good as you are, right? And the one they decide to keep and put into the movie, you'll probably remember that for many years, and remember that moment and how you felt pulling focus. It's the same way. It's in the moment, man. It either is or it isn't. And that ends up in the movie. And that's the result of whoever had their hand on the wheel. And if it was you, you're going to be present in those moments like nothing you've ever done before, man. It's a Zen thing. You're dialed in and you are doing that thing. And exactly what you do ends up on the screen, and you'll see it later. You'll watch the movie and go, I remember when we did that shot. You know, I remember how I felt. I remember what was going on, you know. Those are the
Similar to
moments.
like a runner's high.
Those are the moments you want to collect. They constitute your, you know, your memory of your career, and they inform you, they help you evolve. And it's part of that process. And if you like those moments and you enjoy those memories and you love sharing a beer with a couple of friends and talking about, remember that time we had to build the dolly on that ridiculous location and the director was such an asshole, and yeah, I remember that, and it rained and blah blah. You know, if you don't love those stories, you're in the wrong place, man, because that's all about enjoying what you do instead of having it feel like a job. Right? I can say for 30 years I never had a job. I just was farting around with my buddies having a good time making movies, but I didn't have a job. Now I have a job. I have a job. You know, it's a little less rewarding, but a little less daring and less weird places. Not less rewarding, I think. I enjoy teaching, but
I mean, technically, you're still shooting every day because you're on Zoom, so you know, counts.
yeah, I guess. But there's nothing like being in a weird, exotic place doing strange, difficult, sweaty things for good money and having it appear on a movie screen somewhere in the world and have other people pay $17.50 to go see it. That's what I like. And I hope that you guys have the same experience. All right. Anything else, or should we adjourn?
Just the clarification for the reading of 1.6.
We're on 1.5, my man. 1.6 comes later.
Okay. I was just trying to
Stay
get
in your
jump on-
lane, man. It's all about being in the moment. I just talked to you about being in the moment, right? 1.6 is a moment that hasn't happened yet. 1.5 is where you're at.
Right. Okay. So just don't worry about the reading until after Wednesday.
Yeah. And you can do it after the lecture too. It'll help you skim better, right?
Right.
So you can read it before or read it after. I think if you read it after you've heard me talk about what I think is most important, you can skim through the rest in the textbook. Cool?
Right. Cool.
All right. Well, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Yeah.
All right, folks. Second it is. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for your attention. I appreciate it. And if you have any further questions, you can send an email to me. I'll reach out to you as quickly as I can. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a good afternoon.
Sir.
Take care. See you Wednesday.